Hey there, tonight we're diving into what baking bread was like in ancient Greece, where the truth is that the comforting aroma of fresh loaves was once the domain of priestesses and rituals, not bustling market stalls. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. The sun is just stretching over the horizon, casting its golden light across the ancient city of Athens, and already the air is buzzing with the energy of the agora. You're right in the thick of it, the marketplace where the day truly begins for the people of ancient Greece. The agora isn't just a place to swap goods, it's the living heart of the city, a chaotic symphony of haggling, gossip, and the occasional philosophical debate. But today, your focus is on something more tangible, the humble loaf of bread. Now, if bread doesn't sound like the most thrilling start to your day, let me stop you right there. In the world of ancient Greece, bread is as essential as that first cup of coffee is to us. It's a staple, a symbol of sustenance and community. The bread we're talking about is not just any bread. It's an intricate dance of economics, agriculture, and culture. First, you head to the stalls heaving with grains. Grains, the unsung heroes of the ancient world. Forget the romanticized image of endless wheat fields waving in the breeze. Think more along the lines of barley and emmer wheat, the real MVPs of Greek bread making. Barley, the dependable workhorse of grains, is your first stop. It's what most people use for bread, not because it's a luxurious choice, but because it's practical. Barley grows well in the Mediterranean's rocky soil and doesn't demand much from the land. Kind of like that friend who crashes on your couch but never complains about the lumpy cushions. Plus, it's cheap. A mere handful could feed a family for a day, which makes it the Gouda for the average Athenian household. Emmer wheat, on the other hand, is your more high-maintenance cousin. It requires a bit more TLC to cultivate, but rewards you with a finer texture and a slightly nutty flavor. These grains didn't just pop into the agora by magic. They are the result of an ancient trade network that stretched across the known world. The Greeks weren't just tossing dice when it came to their agriculture. They were strategic, leveraging trade routes that snaked through Egypt, the Levant, and beyond. Each sack of grain you see has a story. It's traveled leagues, crossed borders, and dodged more than a few pirates to get here. The costs vary, but let's just say you can get a sack of barley for around a drachma, the ancient equivalent of a modest meal out. Emmer wheat will set you back a bit more, but hey, quality comes at a price. The thing about bread in ancient Greece is that it's not merely about satisfying hunger. It's woven into the very fabric of society. As you navigate through the bustling stalls, you realize that bread making is a craft dominated by women. Picture this. In most households, women are the ones milling the grains, a task that's both a chore and an art. They use a stone quern, a primitive yet effective tool that's been around since the Neolithic times. It's a hard grind, quite literally, but it's also a communal activity, a chance to share stories and bond over the rhythmic crunch of stone on grain. The economics of grain are nothing short of a political tightrope. The price of grain is a hot topic, one that can spark riots or topple governments. In fact, a bad harvest or a disrupted grain shipment can send ripples through the polis, shaking its very foundations. Bread isn't just food, it's a measure of stability and prosperity. Take the famous statesman Pericles, who once said, "Just because you do not take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics won't take an interest in you." Well, he might as well have been talking about bread. It's a political instrument as much as it's a dietary staple. As you pick out your grains, you might overhear someone grumbling about the cost of barley this year, or another proclaiming the virtues of their grandmother's bread recipe. And then there are the myths, the romantic stories of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, who taught humanity the secrets of agriculture. The tale is charming, sure, but the reality is that farming was less divine intervention and more back-breaking labor under the unforgiving sun. Still, the myth persists, perhaps because it offers a bit of poetry to the routine of daily life. By now, your arms are full of grain sacks, each representing a slice of the ancient world's complex web of trade and agriculture. You're ready to turn these raw materials into something more than just sustenance. Because in ancient Greece, when you break bread, you're not just eating, you're participating in a tradition that binds you to your ancestors, your community, and the very land you walk on. Bread is more than a meal. It's a cornerstone of civilization itself. Stay tuned, because as the day unfolds, we'll dive deeper into the art and craft of turning these humble grains into something extraordinary. Now that you've got those grains, it's time to step into the kitchen of an ancient Greek home. Forget any notions of a sleek, modern kitchen setup with stainless steel appliances. This is more like the kind of setup that would make a survivalist proud. You're in a space where the air is thick with the aroma of grain and wood smoke, a setting that's part domestic sphere, part community hub, and all kinds of fascinating. Let's start with the quernstones, the OGs of the grinding world. These are not some dainty contraptions you'd find in a hipster's kitchen. No, these are hefty slabs of stone that require a certain level of commitment to operate. Picture two heavy stones, one flat and the other rounded. The bottom stone is stationary, while the top one is rotated manually, grinding the grains into flour. It's a process that makes your morning workout look like child's play. A woman could spend hours on this task, her muscles telling tales of endurance, her mind perhaps wandering to the myths of Demeter as she works. The grind is both literal and figurative, and it's no wonder that bread was often called the staff of life. It takes a strong back and a tougher spirit to transform barley into something edible. The irony isn't lost here, of course. This labor-intensive process was often dismissed as women's work, as if it was some leisurely pastime instead of the grueling task it was. Yet, it's this very work that fuels the polis, the city-state, and keeps the wheels of daily life turning. Making bread was a community affair, too. Women gathered, shared stories, exchanged recipes, and undoubtedly vented about the price of barley and the latest political intrigue. It was the social media of its day, complete with its own version of trending topics and viral tales. Once the grain is milled, it's off to the clay ovens, another marvel of ancient ingenuity. These ovens are like the TARDIS of the ancient world, bigger on the inside and capable of producing wonders. Constructed from clay and often domed, they resemble oversized beehives. They might not have temperature dials, but their design is a masterclass in heat retention, allowing bread to bake evenly. You'd find these ovens in courtyards, shared by multiple households, because in the economy of ancient Greece, efficiency was king. Why waste resources when you can pool them? Baking bread was a delicate dance of timing and temperature, an art and a science that required skill and intuition. Too hot, and you've got a charred mess. Too cool, and you're left with doughy disappointment. And let's not forget the wood. Good, dry wood was as critical to a baker as a sharp knife is to a chef today. A poorly chosen log could mean the difference between a perfect loaf and one that's unceremoniously fed to the pigs. This communal baking wasn't just practical, it was a social event in its own right. Remember, this is a society that loves a good gathering, from symposia to public debates. Baking was no different. It was a chance to catch up, swap gossip, and even trade a loaf or two as part of a bartering system that predated coins. In fact, if you couldn't afford to buy emmer wheat, you might negotiate a trade for some fresh figs or olive oil, a testament to the barter economy that underpinned much of Greek life. While bread itself was a staple, the variety was anything but boring. There were flatbreads, leavened loaves, and even sweet breads with additions like honey and nuts. Think of it as the ancient version of artisanal bakeries, minus the Instagram account. Each region had its own specialties, influenced by local ingredients and customs, a tradition that adds a delicious layer of diversity to the culinary landscape. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality is, the process was laborious, and the outcome could be unpredictable. Imagine putting in all that effort only to have a batch go wrong. It's a reminder that, much like life, baking involved a fair share of trial and error, learning and adapting. And while the mythic tales of goddesses like Demeter might paint agriculture as a divine gift, the truth is, it was the sweat and toil of countless women that turned grain into sustenance. To think, this essential activity, often taken for granted, held the power to unite and sustain communities. It's a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of those who came before us. So, as you stand there, watching the loaves rise and brown, you're not just witnessing a culinary feat, You're seeing the beating heart of ancient Greek society, a heart that keeps on beating as long as the bread keeps baking. Stay tuned, because next we'll explore more about how this daily grind fits into the broader tapestry of ancient Greek life, from trade to tradition, and maybe even a little bit of that philosophical debate over the perfect loaf. And speaking of the perfect loaf, let's dive into the rich tapestry of bread types that ancient Greek society had to offer. You see, bread wasn't just a one-size-fits-all affair. It was a culinary spectrum as varied as the Greek pantheon itself, from the Everyman's barley loaf to the decadent honey cakes reserved for the guards, or at least their festivals. The variety of bread in ancient Greece was nothing short of a gastronomic geography lesson. First up, let's talk barley loaves. In terms of bread hierarchy, the barley loaf is the humble foot soldier, the bread and butter staple, pun intended, though butter wasn't really a thing back then. Barley bread was the everyday choice for most Greeks, not because they were fans of its earthy, dense texture, but because it was accessible. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of bread rolls at a diner, always there, reliable and unpretentious. It was the daily bread, literally and figuratively, consumed by farmers, soldiers, and philosophers alike. Even Socrates would have appreciated a good barley loaf, though he'd probably have had a few philosophical quips to throw in about its existential significance. Now, if you were feeling fancy, or perhaps you had some pull with the guards, you might indulge in a loaf made from emmer wheat. This grain was the ancient Greek version of a luxury car, more refined, more expensive, and not exactly practical for the everyday Athenian. A loaf of emmer bread was softer, with a nutty flavor that made it sought after for special occasions. It was the bread of choice for wealthier households who could afford the finer things in life, a status symbol baked right into the crust. But let's not stop there. The Greeks had a penchant for sweetening the deal, quite literally, with honey. Honey-drizzled bread was the showstopper at religious festivals, a treat fit for the gods themselves. Picture this. During the Eleusinian Mysteries, a festival honoring Demeter and Persephone, attendees might have enjoyed these honeyed delights as part of their sacred rites. The sweetness of honey symbolized the hope of a bountiful harvest and the return of life to the earth. These cakes weren't just food. They were ceremonial offerings, a delicious bridge between mortals and the divine. And here's where the myths start to bake into reality. The romantic notion is that these honey cakes were a direct line to the gods, a way to curry favor with those celestial beings who held sway over the harvest. But peel back the layers, and you'll find a more grounded truth. These festivals were as much about community and social hierarchy as they were about divine favor. Attending these events wasn't just a spiritual pilgrimage. It was a chance to see and be seen, to network while nibbling on sacrosanct sweets. It's like the ancient world's version of a gala dinner, part worship, part socialite spectacle. The types of bread consumed also reflected one's place in society. For example, the Spartan black broth, infamous for its Spartan simplicity, was accompanied by a particularly austere loaf. It was a far cry from the honeyed confections of Athens, reflecting the harsh, militaristic lifestyle of its people. It's bread with a side of discipline, a culinary reminder of the values that shaped Spartan life. Meanwhile, in places like Athens, bread could be a political tool. Distribute free bread to the populace, and you've got a city that's as full as it is politically placated. Bread and circuses, anyone. But let's not sugarcoat or honeycoat this too much. The Greek diet was a product of necessity as much as choice. Bread was the backbone, but it was often supplemented with olives, figs, and the occasional fish. Meat was a rarity, reserved for sacrifices or special occasions. It's easy to romanticize the Mediterranean diet, but the daily grind was more about survival than indulgence. And then there's the myth of the ambrosia, the food of the gods, said to grant immortality. While we don't have any recipes that'll let you live forever, the idea of bread as something divine persists through the ages. In reality, bread was more about sustaining life than extending it, a staple that kept the Greek world turning. But isn't it nice to think that somewhere in those crumbly loaves and sticky honey cakes there was a touch of the divine, a whisper of immortality wrapped in a humble crust? So, as you ponder the breadbasket of ancient Greece, remember that each loaf tells a story of survival, of social status, of divine aspiration. Bread was the common thread that wove together the daily lives of Greeks, from the grandest banquet to the simplest meal. It was both a daily necessity and a symbol of greater aspirations. And as we move forward, let's continue to unravel the layers of this ancient society, one loaf at a time. Stay with me, because next up, we'll delve into how these bread traditions influenced not just the diet, but the very identity of the ancient Greeks. Now, as we dig deeper into the crusty world of ancient Greek bread, let's peel away the romantic veneer and take a hard look at the less glamorous realities lurking beneath the surface. Because, my friends, while the Mediterranean climate might conjure images of sun-drenched olive groves and plentiful harvests, the truth is, the Greek world was often teetering on the edge of food scarcity, and nothing brings that into sharper focus than the political chess game of grain distribution. First, let's set the stage. Ancient Greece wasn't a unified country, but a collection of fiercely independent city-states. Each had its own government, culture, and often its own dialect. This patchwork of parlises was a bit like a Greek salad, each ingredient vying for attention, and yet part of the same dish. The city-states were constantly jostling for supremacy, and one way to assert dominance was through control of grain supplies. Grain was the lifeblood of these societies, and controlling it was akin to holding the keys to the city gates. Athens, for instance, was particularly savvy in playing this game. They were the OGs of strategic alliances, ensuring that their grain routes remained open and secure. They struck deals with grain-rich regions like Egypt and the Black Sea area, essentially buttering their bread on both sides, if you will. But buttering wasn't the only thing on their minds. It was also about hedging against famine. Now, here's a juicy tidbit. The Athenian leader Pericles, that clever statesman who knew a thing or two about politics, famously invested in a robust navy. You might think, great, they just wanted to rule the waves and look cool in the process. But no, my friends. The true genius was in securing the grain trade routes. The Athenian navy wasn't just a fleet of warships. It was a flotilla of floating insurance policies against hunger. They safeguarded the grain ships traversing treacherous waters, ensuring that Athens remained a well-fed powerhouse. But let's not pretend this was some utopian system. Grain prices were a volatile beast, prone to fluctuations that could set the stage for public unrest faster than you could say barley loaf. A poor harvest, a storm at sea, or even a pirate raid could send prices skyrocketing. And when bread became scarce, so too did political stability. Bread riots weren't just a footnote in history. They were a real and present danger. In fact, prices could double or even triple during times of scarcity, putting the staple food out of reach for many. Here's where the political savvy, or lack thereof, really comes into play. Leaders who failed to manage grain supplies risked losing their grip on power. The people had little patience for leaders who couldn't keep the bread ovens full. Remember that catchy phrase, bread and circuses, from ancient Rome? Well, the Greeks were well aware of the concept long before the Romans came along. Bread was not just a foodstuff. It was a political tool. Leaders could rally support or quell dissent by distributing free or subsidized bread, a tactic that was as much about maintaining peace as it was about feeding the populace. Yet the myth of the idyllic Mediterranean lifestyle persists. The image of endless banquets and abundant harvests is appealing, isn't it? It paints a picture of a world where everyone had enough to eat and no one went to bed hungry. But let's be real. The reality was often harsher. The Greek diet was largely vegetarian out of necessity rather than choice. Meat was a luxury, and even fish wasn't as common as you'd think, despite Greece's extensive coastline. Bread, olives, and figs were the staples, occasionally jazzed up with whatever could be foraged or bartered for. And then there were the wars. War, the great disruptor of plans and dinner tables alike. Wars were not just about conquering new territory. They were also about securing food resources. The Peloponnesian War, for instance, wasn't just a clash of Titan city-states. It was a prolonged struggle that strained resources to breaking point. The long sieges and naval blockades wreaked havoc on grain supplies, leading to shortages that affected everyone from the wealthiest citizens to the poorest laborers. The Athenian strategy of relying on imported grain suddenly seemed less foolproof when Spartan forces blockaded ports and cut off supply lines. These grain shortages weren't just inconvenient, they were catastrophic. Imagine, one day you're enjoying your simple barley loaf, and the next, you're wondering where your next meal is coming from. Citizens would have to make do with less, stretching their supplies as far as possible, often resorting to foraging or relying on more creatively unappetizing substitutes. It's a stark reminder that the luxury of choice was often reserved for the few, while the many had to grapple with the harsh realities of scarcity. And yet, in the face of these challenges, the Greeks were nothing if not resilient. They adapted, they innovated, and they found ways to survive. Bread, the humble loaf, was both the symbol of their struggles and their triumphs. It was a testament to their ingenuity and their ability to persevere through the toughest of times. So, as we continue to unravel the layers of ancient Greek society, let's not just admire the myths and legends. Let's also appreciate the grit and determination of those who lived through the bread shortages and political machinations. Because in the end, it's those stories of resilience that truly enrich our understanding of history. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover as we delve into how the ancient Greeks navigated these turbulent waters, both literally and metaphorically. From the strategic maneuverings of city-states to the daily grind of the common folk, there's a wealth of stories waiting to be told. And who knows, we might just discover that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And there we have it, the bustling agora, the clamour of the marketplace, and the grind of querns, stones, all threads weaving the grand tapestry of ancient Greek life. But before you hang up your historian hat and drift off into sleep, let's pull at a few more of those threads to see where they lead. Because if you thought bread was just a side character in the drama of ancient Greece, think again. This humble loaf has left a legacy as enduring as the Parthenon itself. Let's start with a crumb of truth. Bread in ancient Greece wasn't just a dietary staple. It was the glue holding society together. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and the echoes of those ancient practices still resonate in how we bake today. Modern artisanal bakers might not realize they're channeling their inner Athenian when they roll up their sleeves and knead dough, but the links are there, binding the past to the present with every loaf that rises. Take sourdough, for example. That hipster darling of the bread world, with its tangy bite and chewy texture, traces its roots back to methods used by our Greek ancestors. They harnessed wild yeasts and bacteria, letting nature work its magic long before the term fermentation became a culinary buzzword. The result was a bread that, like ancient Greek society, was complex, robust, and full of character. Modern bakers may have their digital thermometers and climate-controlled proofing boxes, but the heart of the process remains unchanged. It's a testament to the ancient Greeks' ingenuity that their methods have not only survived but thrived, adapting to technology while retaining their essence. And speaking of survival, let's talk about the Mediterranean diet. Often lauded as the pinnacle of healthy eating, this diet owes much to the ancient Greeks' knack for making do with what they had. Bread, olives, figs, and the occasional splash of olive oil were the cornerstones then, and they still hold sway today. The diet reflects a lifestyle shaped by necessity and ingenuity, a blueprint for health that continues to inspire. It's a culinary legacy that's not just about flavor, but about balance, sustainability, and resourcefulness, qualities that resonate with today's eco-conscious foodies. But let's not sugarcoat, or in this case, honeycoat, this too much. While the romantic image of Greeks feasting on freshly baked bread and sun-kissed olives is alluring, the reality was often grittier. Food scarcity was a constant specter, and bread riots weren't just historical footnotes. They were a reminder of the fragility of society. Yet, through these challenges, the Greeks fostered a culture that celebrated communal effort and shared resources. Their resilience in the face of adversity is a lesson that transcends time, echoing in our modern world where food security remains a pressing issue. Now, here's a twist in the tale. The notion of bread as a political instrument is far from extinct. Sure, today we might not see politicians doling out loaves to secure votes, but the symbolism persists. In fact, could argue that modern welfare systems, with their food assistance programs, are the spiritual successors to those ancient distributions of grain. It's a reminder that, while the trappings of power and politics have evolved, the fundamental need to keep the populace fed and content remains unchanged. And as we pull back to see the broader picture, we find that bread, in its simplicity, reveals the complexities of human society. It's a microcosm of culture, economy, and politics, a slice of life that tells us more about who we are and where we came from than any marble statue or grandiose epic. The ancient Greeks might not have foreseen how their daily bread would leave such a lasting impression, but in their pursuit of sustenance, they forged a legacy that continues to nourish our bodies and minds. So, as you sit back, perhaps with a piece of bread in hand, consider this. Every bite you take is a connection to the past, a taste of history that has journeyed through time to reach your plate. The story of bread is the story of civilization itself, a tale of survival, innovation, and community. It's a reminder that the simplest things in life often carry the greatest significance. And as you ponder this, let the weight of history settle in, like the comforting heft of a freshly baked loaf. In the end, the legacy of ancient Greek bread is more than just a culinary curiosity. It's a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity. It speaks of a time when the world was both simpler and more complex, when the daily grind was literal and the stakes were high. And as we navigate our own challenges in this modern age, perhaps there's comfort to be found in the knowledge that, like those ancient bakers, we too have the resilience to rise to the occasion. So there you have it, a journey through time with bread as our guide, offering a glimpse into the soul of ancient Greece and the timeless truths it holds. As you drift off into sleep, let the echoes of history whisper in your ear, reminding you that the past is never far away, especially when it's as close as your next meal. And with that, my friends, I bid you good night and sweet dreams of loaves past and future. In the year 1162, on the windswept plains of Mongolia, where the air was as crisp as a freshly minted coin, a baby named Temujin was born. Now, before you start conjuring up images of a small, adorable conqueror in training, let's set the record straight. Temujin, who would later be known to the world as Genghis Khan, wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth, or any spoon, for that matter. His early years were more survivalist boot camp than princely upbringing. Temujin was thrust into a world as harsh as the Mongolian winters. His father, Yesuje, was a tribal chief, but this wasn't the cushy gig you might expect. It was more like being the manager of a chaotic, nomadic startup, where your workforce could defect at any moment if they found a better offer. The Mongolian steppe was a place where you didn't just survive on your wits, you thrived on them. And little Temujin had plenty of opportunities to sharpen his. Family dynamics in Temujin's life were about as stable as a three-legged stool. His father's untimely death when Temujin was just 9 years old threw the family into turmoil. Yesuje was poisoned by a rival tribe, which sounds dramatic, but in those days it was just Tuesday. With the chief gone, his family was swiftly abandoned by their clan, leaving them to fend for themselves. Temujin, Mother Holan, and his siblings were left in the cold, quite literally. This was less tragic backstory and more life lesson in resourcefulness. Now, here's where we debunk the myth of Temujin's rags to riches story. Was he poor? Absolutely. He and his family lived off wild fruits and hunted small game, which was a step down from the tribal feasts they were used to. But was this some dramatic Cinderella story? Not quite. The steppe was an equal opportunity oppressor. Everyone had to hustle. The difference was, Temujin hustled with a vision that would make even the most ambitious Silicon Valley entrepreneur do a double take. You see, Temujin had a knack for recognizing talent. Forget literacy. His true skill was in building a human resources department that would put modern corporations to shame. He began by forging alliances with other tribes, and by alliances, I mean he married Bort, the girl next yurt, who came with a strategic alliance of her own. When Bort was kidnapped by a rival tribe, Temujin didn't just sit around writing sad poetry. He rallied his allies, rescued her, and in the process, strengthened his own position. His real genius lay in adopting a sort of meritocracy that was uncommon at the time. Temujin didn't care if you were born into the right family. He cared if you could get the job done. This was revolutionary in a society where bloodlines meant everything. It's like he took a look at the nepotism rampant in his world and said, "Nah, let's try something different." He promoted based on ability and loyalty, a strategy that would pay off in spades. While his contemporaries were busy backstabbing each other over ancestral grievances, Temujin was busy building a coalition. He understood the value of loyalty and rewarded it generously, often with a share of the spoils from raids. And if you thought his recruitment strategy was all about the carrot, think again. The stick was very much in play. Join him, and you were in for a share of the wealth. Resist, and you might find your village on the wrong end of a Mongol raid. By his early 20s, Temujin had already begun to unite the fractured Mongolian tribes under his leadership. This wasn't just a political maneuver, it was a social revolution. He outlawed the kidnapping of women and cattle rustling, which might seem like basic decency, but was groundbreaking at the time. These laws helped stabilize the society he was building, giving it coherence and a sense of shared destiny. Temujin's rise was less about destiny and more about delivering results. He understood the landscape of human behavior as well as he understood the landscape of the steppe. His ability to turn enemies into allies set the stage for the creation of an empire that would stretch from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. Not bad for a kid who started with nothing but the vast sky above and the endless grasslands beneath his feet. So, when you think of Genghis Khan, don't just picture a bloodthirsty conqueror. Picture a man who, in the brutal world of the Mongolian steppe, saw possibilities where others saw only obstacles. A man who, despite his illiteracy, read the human soul better than most. Temujin's story is a reminder that the most powerful weapon in building an empire isn't a sword, it's a savvy understanding of people. Now, speaking of savvy understandings, let's talk tactics, the kind of military brilliance that would have put Sun Tzu on notice. By the time Temujin earned the title Genghis Khan, he wasn't just uniting tribes and making social reforms. He was also revolutionizing how wars were fought. Picture this, a battlefield where brute force takes a backseat to cunning, adaptability, and a bit of theatrics. Genghis Khan's military strategies were less about smashing your face in and more about making you think twice before you even showed up. One of his most infamous tactics was the feigned retreat. Now, you might think, retreat sounds like a losing move. But in the hands of a Mongol commander, it was a psychological masterstroke. Imagine watching the enemy turn tail and run, only for them to come roaring back at you when least expected. It's like playing dead in a game of tag, only to catch your opponent completely off guard. Genghis's troops would pretend to flee, luring their foes into a false sense of victory before ambushing them in a counterattack that was as much about surprise as it was about precision. It was a bit like the ancient world's version of a well-executed bait-and switch, a strategy that caught many a seasoned general flat-footed. But let's not stop there. Genghis was a maestro of psychological warfare. He knew that fear was as powerful a weapon as any sword or arrow. To this end, he employed tactics designed to spread terror long before his armies even arrived. One favorite was the use of exaggerated numbers. Genghis would send scouts ahead to spread rumors about the sheer size of his army, inflating their numbers to mythic proportions. This wasn't just bravado. It was deliberate misinformation, turning the Mongols into a bogeyman in the minds of his enemies. It's a bit like saying your party is so epic, everyone's dying to attend, literally, in this case. The legend of Mongol horseback archers is another tale that deserves a closer look. We're not just talking about guys who could ride horses and shoot bows. We're talking Olympic-level coordination and precision, except instead of medals, they won empires. Mongol warriors were trained from childhood, making them the medieval equivalent of sports champions, but with a bit more riding and fewer screens. Their horses, small but mighty, were like the sports cars of the steppe, allowing for incredible mobility and speed. A Mongol archer could hit a target while riding at full gallop, turning them into something like a mobile artillery unit. This wasn't just a skill, it was a game changer, allowing them to harass, outmaneuver, and eventually decimate more heavily armored but far less mobile foes. Let's not forget the communication system Genghis developed, a kind of ancient pony express. The Yam, as it was called, was a relay network of riders and horses that could carry messages across vast distances with astonishing speed. This gave the Mongol army an edge in coordination and strategy, keeping them steps ahead of their adversaries. Imagine running a global empire with the efficiency of a modern courier service, only all your packages are battle plans and orders. It was the internet of its day, minus the memes and cat videos. Of course, none of this would have worked if Genghis hadn't been a master of adaptability. He wasn't just sticking to one playbook, he was writing new ones as he went. If a tactic didn't work, he'd change it, and if an enemy had a better weapon or technique, he'd adopt it. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Genghis wasn't married to tradition. His creed was simple: if it works, use it. This flexibility allowed him to integrate various fighting styles and technologies from conquered peoples, turning the Mongol army into a melting pot of military innovation. And let's face it, the Mongol army was the original assemble-your-own-adventure story. While other leaders were busy arguing over whose sword was bigger, Genghis was out there collecting the best ideas from everywhere he conquered, from siege warfare techniques to new weaponry. It was less about cultural superiority and more about practical application. In fact, Genghis once said, "The greatest joy a man can know is to conquer his enemies," but it was probably followed by, and steal their best ideas. While the image of Genghis Khan as a bloodthirsty conqueror looms large, the reality is that he was as much a strategist as a warrior. His genius lay in his ability to see the battlefield not just as a place of combat, but as a complex equation of human emotions and tactical possibilities. He wasn't just fighting battles, he was playing chess, several moves ahead of everyone else, often before they even knew they were in the game. This mental agility, coupled with a ruthless pragmatism, allowed him to build an empire that, at its height, covered 9 million square miles, about the size of Africa. Not bad for a guy who started with a ragtag band of nomads and a few good ideas. So, next time you hear the name Genghis Khan, think beyond the stereotypical image of a rampaging barbarian. Consider the man who transformed chaos into order, who turned the art of war into a kind of performance art, and who understood that the greatest battles are won not just on the field, but in the minds of those who dare to oppose you. His story is a testament to the power of innovation, adaptability, and a good sense of timing, the kind of legacy that, quite literally, changed the world. And if you think that's the end of the story, hold your horses, we're just getting started. And speaking of timing, let's dive into the nuts and bolts of how Genghis Khan's war machine kept rolling across continents like the world's most aggressive road trip. If you thought it was all about pillaging and plundering, well, let's just say that's as accurate as describing a gourmet chef as a sandwich artist. Sure, the Mongols made quite an impression with their sieges and raids, but behind the scenes, it was a logistical ballet that would make even the most seasoned supply chain manager break into applause. First off, let's talk numbers, because the Mongol Empire wasn't just vast, it was mind-bogglingly huge. At its peak, the empire stretched over 9 million square miles. That's like trying to manage a company with branches in every time zone. But unlike your average corporate expansion, this wasn't about conference calls and emails. It was about ensuring that tens of thousands of soldiers were fed, mounted, and ready to roll at a moment's notice. And we're not talking a quick jaunt down the Silk Road. The Mongols could cover up to 100 miles a day. That's like biking a century ride, except on horseback, in armor, and with the occasional skirmish. So, how did Genghis pull off this logistical miracle? Spoiler alert. It wasn't magic or sheer brute force. It all came down to meticulous planning and an ingenious system of supply lines. You see, the Mongol army was less like a swarm of locusts and more like a well-oiled machine. They didn't just rely on pillaging to fill their bellies, although that certainly helped. Instead, they set up an elaborate network of depots and relay stations. Imagine a medieval version of Amazon's fulfillment centers, strategically placed to ensure that supplies were always within reach. These supply stations stocked everything from food to weaponry, ensuring the troops were never left wanting for essentials. And talk about sustainability. Mongol soldiers didn't just rely on local resources. They brought their own portable food supplies. The famous Mongol horsemen would carry dried meat and fermented milk, providing a high-energy snack on the go. Think of it as the original protein bar, minus the fancy packaging and marketing. Now, let's debunk the myth of the unstoppable horde that swept across the plains with reckless abandon. The reality was far more calculated. Genghis Khan understood that a hungry army was as useful as a chocolate teapot. So, he made sure his forces were not only well-fed, but also strategically rested. The Mongols employed a rotating system where some troops would rest, while others took up the fight, ensuring that they were perpetually battle-ready. It was the 13th century equivalent of shift work, but with a bit more swordplay. And here's another fun fact. The Mongols were master recyclers long before it was cool. When they conquered a new territory, they didn't just take the spoils and move on. They absorbed the local artisans and craftsmen into their ranks, harnessing their skills to produce weapons and supplies. It wasn't just about taking what they could carry. It was about integrating and utilizing the best of what each conquered land had to offer. Imagine a military operation that was part conquest, part cultural exchange program. Economically speaking, Genghis Khan's campaigns were a double-edged sword. On one hand, they disrupted trade routes and local economies. On the other, they opened up new opportunities for commerce and cultural exchange. The Mongols were like the original globalists, connecting east and west in ways that would have been unimaginable before their time. They even went so far as to establish a kind of proto-free trade zone, lowering tariffs and protecting merchants who operated under their aegis. It was a win-win situation, provided you didn't mind a little bloodshed along the way. Politically, the Mongol conquests were a masterclass in realpolitik. Genghis understood that ruling through sheer terror was a short-term strategy. To maintain control over his sprawling empire, he needed to balance fear with diplomacy. He installed a system of local governors who reported back to him, ensuring that each region remained loyal to the central authority. It was like setting up regional offices with a direct line to the CEO, keeping everyone on the same page, or at least on the same scroll. The myth of the Mongol horde as an unstoppable force of chaos is a romantic notion, but reality paints a different picture. Behind the legend was a strategist who understood the complexities of logistics, economics, and human psychology. Genghis Khan's genius lay in his ability to see the battlefield as a stage where every move was choreographed with precision. He wasn't just about conquest. He was about creating an empire that could sustain itself across vast distances and diverse cultures. And just when you think you've got a handle on this logistical juggernaut, consider this. Genghis Khan's military campaigns were conducted without the luxury of modern communication. No texting your general a quick strategy update. Instead, he relied on an intricate system of messengers and signals, including smoke and flags, to coordinate his forces. It was the medieval equivalent of a really intense game of charades, but with a lot more at stake. In the end, what Genghis Khan achieved was nothing short of extraordinary. His conquests were less about the brutality of war and more about the art of strategy. He turned the Mongol Empire into a well-orchestrated symphony where every note counted. So next time you hear tales of the Mongol hordes, remember the logistics, the planning, and the sheer brilliance that made it all possible. And hold onto your saddles, because there's still more to this story. We're not done galloping through history just yet. But hold onto your helmets, because the empire of Genghis Khan wasn't just a well-oiled war machine. It was also a thriving behemoth sustained by an intricate web of political and economic strategies. Let's talk about the postal system first, because yes, even back then, people were obsessed with getting their messages delivered faster than you can say Amazon Prime. Enter the Yam, a communication network that was the envy of medieval bureaucracies everywhere. Picture a series of relay stations stretched across the empire, like a medieval FedEx, but with a lot more horses and far fewer tracking numbers. These stations were spaced about a day's ride apart, allowing messengers to swap out tired horses for fresh ones, ensuring the message kept galloping across the landscape without missing a beat. The result, information could travel at lightning speed. Well, for the 13th century anyway. It said that messages could cover up to 200 miles a day. Not too shabby for a time when express delivery usually involved a guy on a donkey. This wasn't just about speed, it was about control. By ensuring that his orders could be dispatched and received rapidly, Genghis Khan maintained a tight grip on his sprawling empire. It's like he turned the whole of Asia into his own personal Twitter feed, minus the trolls and hashtags. And while the Yam was a marvel of logistics, it was also a symbol of trust. Only those who were deemed loyal and capable were chosen to work within this system, a medieval LinkedIn recommendation, if ever there was one. Now, let's talk about Genghis Khan's open-door policy for talent. The man had a knack for spotting skill and seizing it, whether it was found in friend or foe. His empire was a melting pot of cultures and talents, an ancient version of a Silicon Valley startup, but with more swords and fewer lattes. Conquered peoples weren't just enslaved or slaughtered. They were given opportunities to shine. Captured artisans, engineers, and scholars were integrated into Mongol society, contributing their expertise to the empire's growth. It's like Genghis ran the world's most aggressive talent acquisition program, where the stakes were a bit higher than hitting quarterly targets. The irony, of course, is that many of these people were originally enemies. But Genghis understood that brains could often be more useful than brawn. He valued loyalty and ability over lineage, a revolutionary concept in a world where your bloodline was your business card. This meritocratic approach meant that if you had the skills to contribute, you could find a place in the Mongol hierarchy. In fact, some of his most trusted generals and administrators were former enemies who had switched sides, trading their allegiance for a spot in Genghis Khan's inner circle. The Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace, was another feather in Genghis's cap, turning his empire into a medieval utopia of sorts. This wasn't peace in the Kumbaya sense. It was peace through overwhelming power and strict governance. But the result was a period of stability and economic prosperity that connected the East and West like never before. Trade routes flourished under Mongol protection, with merchants able to travel vast distances without fear of bandits or excessive tolls. It was almost like a medieval free trade agreement, minus the lengthy negotiations and power lunches. Economically, the Pax Mongolica turned the Mongol Empire into a bustling hub of commerce and cultural exchange. By reducing tariffs and ensuring the safety of trade routes, Genghis Khan effectively turned his empire into the world's largest open market. The Silk Road, that legendary artery of trade, thrived under Mongol rule, with goods, ideas, and innovations flowing in both directions. Silk from China, spices from India, and precious metals from the Middle East all moved along these routes, enriching not just the merchants, but the empire itself. Politically, the Pax Mongolica was a masterstroke. By allowing local rulers a degree of autonomy as long as they paid tribute and remained loyal, Genghis Khan could maintain control without the constant need for military intervention. This decentralized approach meant that the empire could govern vast territories effectively, using a mix of fear and diplomacy. It was less about micromanaging and more about setting clear expectations, like a good manager who knows when to delegate. The administrative genius behind this system was a combination of ruthless pragmatism and forward-thinking innovation. Genghis Khan understood the importance of law and order, instituting a code of laws known as the Yasa. Though the exact details of the Yasa remain shrouded in mystery, it's clear that it emphasized loyalty, discipline, and respect for authority. Think of it as the Mongol Empire's employee handbook, but with slightly more severe consequences for infractions. In creating this legal framework, Genghis Khan laid the groundwork for a society that, while far from egalitarian, was remarkably stable given its diversity and size. Crime was met with swift justice, and loyalty was rewarded generously. It's like he understood that a well-run empire was less about brute force and more about the rule of law, with a dash of fear thrown in for good measure. So, while Genghis Khan's empire might have been born from conquest, it was sustained by a complex web of political and economic strategies that were ahead of their time. He understood that the real challenge wasn't just in taking new lands, but in holding them together. And for all the bloodshed and brutality, the reality is that Genghis Khan left behind a legacy of connectivity and innovation that would shape the world for centuries to come. And while the myth of the bloodthirsty barbarian is an easy one to sell, the truth is far more nuanced. Genghis Khan was as much a builder as a destroyer, as much a strategist as a warrior. His genius lay not just in his ability to conquer, but in his capacity to govern, to integrate, and to innovate. So, as we continue to unravel the complex tapestry of his empire, remember that behind every legend lies a multitude of truths, each one as fascinating as the last. And if you think we've reached the end of his story, think again. There's still more ground to cover. We're not done exploring the vast empire of Genghis Khan just yet. So here we are, at the grand finale of our saga about Genghis Khan, a figure as infamous as he is fascinating, his legacy a patchwork quilt of brutality and brilliance. Let's dive into how his conquests reshaped not just Asia, but also Europe, and why his PR team, if he had one, would have had their work cut out for them. First off, let's tackle the palpable tension between the legend and the man. Genghis Khan is often depicted as the poster child for ruthless conquest, a veritable whirlwind of destruction, so intense that even the most hardened warriors of the time had to check their courage at the door. But remember, this isn't some medieval horror movie where he was just out for blood. Genghis was a visionary with a strategy that went beyond mere pillage and plunder. His empire-building antics were less about wanton destruction and more about creating an interconnected world. His reign stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, covering a jaw-dropping 22% of the Earth's total land area at its peak. That's roughly equivalent to the combined landmass of North America and Australia. Not exactly your average weekend project. But here's the kicker. Genghis Khan's influence extended beyond the borders of his empire. His military campaigns had ripple effects that reshaped the very fabric of Eurasian history. For starters, he didn't just bash his way through territories like a bull in a china shop. He remapped the trade routes, transforming the Silk Road into a superhighway of commerce and culture. While the Mongol armies might have initially rolled in like the ultimate uninvited guests, their rule eventually turned vast regions into thriving economic hubs. Merchants could travel from the coasts of China to the heart of Europe with a sense of security that was rare for the time. In essence, Genghis Khan was the unwitting architect of globalization long before the term became a buzzword. And let's not forget about the cultural exchange. Genghis Khan's empire was like a gigantic cauldron in which ideas, technologies, and even people were constantly being stirred. The Mongols had an insatiable appetite for knowledge, and they absorbed the best of what each region had to offer. From Persian astronomy to Chinese military technology, Genghis Khan's empire was like the world's most aggressive talent show, where the winners got to keep their heads. Of course, the path to this interconnected utopia was paved with skulls, quite literally. The Mongols were notorious for their brutal tactics, and their campaigns left a trail of devastation that would make any modern dictator blush. Baghdad, once the jewel of the Islamic world, was sacked in 1258 by Genghis's grandson Hulagu Khan, effectively ending the Islamic Golden Age. The city was left in ruins, its libraries destroyed, and its population decimated. It's a stark reminder that while the Mongols were masters of integration, they were also skilled practitioners of annihilation when it suited their purposes. But here's where the myth-busting comes in. The Mongols weren't just about carnage. They were more like the ancient world's version of a disruptive startup, shaking up the status quo and forcing everyone to adapt or perish. Genghis Khan's penchant for meritocracy and his openness to ideas from across his empire sowed the seeds for a society that was remarkably progressive for its time. His legal code, the Yasa, was draconian, yet surprisingly forward-thinking, emphasizing religious tolerance and the importance of trade. It's like he was running a medieval social experiment, testing the limits of what a society could achieve when freed from the shackles of hereditary privilege. But let's not get too romantic here. Genghis Khan's image has been as polarizing as a pineapple on pizza. Some love him, others loathe him. His name is synonymous with both cultural flourishing and catastrophic destruction. The Black Death, which swept across Europe in the mid-14th century, is believed to have traveled along the very trade routes that the Mongols revitalized. It's as if Genghis Khan was posthumously reminding the world that every silver lining has its cloud. Fast forward to today, and you'll find that Genghis Khan's impact is still echoing through the corridors of modern military strategy. His emphasis on mobility, adaptability, and psychological warfare has been studied by military leaders for centuries. The Mongol tactic of the feigned retreat, for example, is still taught in military academies around the world as a case study in cunning over brute force. Genghis Khan understood that the mind was the ultimate battlefield, a lesson that resonates in today's age of cyber warfare and psychological operations. But perhaps the most enduring aspect of Genghis Khan's legacy is the way it challenges us to reconsider the narratives we construct about history. The Mongol Empire was a paradox, simultaneously a force of destruction and a catalyst for connectivity. In a world where we often cling to binary views of good versus evil, Genghis Khan stands as a reminder that history is far more complex, a tapestry woven from threads of both light and shadow. So, as we close the book on Genghis Khan, remember that this isn't just a story about a nomadic warrior who carved out one of the largest empires in human history. It's a story about the power of vision, the complexity of human ambition, and the enduring influence of a man who understood that the world is both a battlefield and a stage. And in the theater of history, Genghis Khan played his part with a flair that would have made even the most seasoned actors envious. His legacy is as much a mirror reflecting our own potential for both greatness and folly, as it is a monument to the indomitable spirit of human ingenuity. Thomas More's early life was a cocktail of Latin conjugations, legal jargon, and a healthy dose of ambition. Born in 1478, just a year into the reign of King Henry Roman VII, More was the son of a lawyer, a profession that, in those days, was as much about survival as it was about serving justice. Law was a family business, and young Thomas was knee-deep in it from the start. But the future saint and statesman didn't just stumble into greatness. He navigated it with the precision of a man who knew when to play the fool and when to reveal the ace up his sleeve. More's education kicked off at St. Anthony's School in London, a place known less for its physical grandeur and more for its rigorous curriculum. Think of it as a Tudor-era cram school for the bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. By 1492, More found himself amidst the spires of Oxford University, a hub of scholarly zeal and a fair amount of pretentious Latin oration. There, he dove into the world of classical studies. More didn't just embrace the academic grind, he waltzed through it, earning a reputation for his quick wit and sharper tongue. He spent 2 years at Oxford, where his studies in Latin, logic, and a smattering of Greek were enough to make even the most erudite scholar nod in approval. But Oxford wasn't all dusty tomes and dead languages. It was a place where the future Chancellor honed his skills in rhetoric, a talent that would serve him well both in court and in the court of public opinion. The university was a breeding ground for debate, and it was here that More began to flirt with the writings of Plato and Aristotle, setting the stage for his later work on Utopia, a book that would stir more parts than a medieval kitchen. After Oxford, More's trajectory took a twist as he returned to London to study law at New Inn, one of the inns of Chancery. Let's be honest, the allure of the law was as much about prestige as it was about profit. By 1496, More was admitted to Lincoln's Inn, one of the 4 inns of court, which was essentially the Hogwarts of English law. Here, he was groomed to become a barrister, and by 1501, he was called to the bar. More was no legal slouch. He navigated the complex world of English law with the dexterity of a tightrope walker. But here's the kicker. More's life wasn't just about climbing the career ladder. He had a knack for keeping things light, even when the stakes were high. Take his interactions with Henry Roman VIII, a monarch known for his volatile moods and penchant for marital drama. More, with his razor-sharp wit, knew exactly how to handle the king. On one occasion, when Henry praised More's new residence in Chelsea, More quipped that it was indeed a fine house, if only he could keep it. This was a sly nod to the king's habit of appropriating properties for himself, and it earned More a chuckle and perhaps a bit more breathing room. More's rise in English society was as much about his legal acumen as it was about his ability to read the room. He was like a Tudor-era diplomat, minus the pomp and circumstance. He knew when to play the game and when to hold back, a skill that kept him in Henry's good graces longer than most. But More wasn't just a court jester. He was a serious thinker with a penchant for challenging the status quo. His work on Utopia, penned in 1516, was a satirical critique of the socio-political landscape. It painted a picture of an ideal society that was as much a jab at the powers that be as it was a philosophical treatise. In the end, Thomas More's early life was a testament to the power of wit and wisdom. He maneuvered through the labyrinth of English society with a keen sense of humour and a mind that was always 2 steps ahead. Whether in the halls of Oxford or the courts of London, More was a man who knew how to play the game and win, at least for a time. Fast forward to 1516, and Thomas More has just dropped a literary bombshell on Europe, Utopia. It's not just a book, it's a scalpel, slicing through the bloated egos of European rulers with its sharp satire. More's Utopia wasn't a mere dalliance with fiction, but a full-blown critique of the socio-political circus of his time. Think of it as the Renaissance's version of a viral tweet storm, complete with biting wit and a message that stings long after the laughter fades. The myth of Utopia as a dreamland comes from its depiction of an island where communal ownership quashes greed and peace reigns supreme. But here's the kicker. More wasn't laying out blueprints for a perfect society. He was holding up a mirror to the flaws of 16th century Europe. His fictional world was a utopia in name only, a no-place, a no-her-land, a clever pun in Greek. More was riffing on the absurdity of his own society by creating one that was deliberately outlandish, yet eerily familiar. In Utopia, there's no private property, because why hoard when you can share, right? But More knew this was more fantasy than feasible. In 16th century England, land was power. The idea of communal ownership was as foreign as, well, an island named Utopia. More's society was one where everyone worked 6-hour days, leaving ample time for leisure and learning. In contrast, the average worker in Europe was laboring from sunrise to sunset, with barely enough time to wonder if their own life was just a satire in disguise. More's islanders elect leaders who rule not by might, but by merit. A noble notion, but back in the real world, the political scene was more Game of Thrones than democracy. Henry Roman VIII and his contemporaries were hardly about to give up their divine rights for a dose of meritocracy. The satire deepens with More's take on war. The utopians detest it, using it only as a last resort, and even then hiring mercenaries to do their dirty work. Meanwhile, the kings of Europe were embroiled in battles more often than not, with wars being as much a part of life as the changing seasons. Let's not gloss over the economic critique embedded in Utopia. More was throwing shade at the rampant inequality of his day. The utopians' wealth wasn't measured in gold, since they thought it was good for little more than chamber parts, but in the well-being of their citizens. In contrast, England's upper crust was hoarding wealth like squirrels before winter, while the poor scraped by on crumbs. More's pointed commentary was as much a jab at the church as it was at the state. The clergy, with their indulgences and opulence, were part of the problem, not the solution. Now, some might say More was just a dreamer, but he was more of a realist with a side of sarcasm. He knew that the very idea of a perfect society was as flawed as the societies it critiqued. Utopia was a conversation starter, a literary hand grenade tossed into the halls of power. Its message was clear. If you want change, first see your reality for what it is, a far cry from perfection. But while Utopia was busy ruffling feathers, More was still playing the game in Henry Roman VIII court, navigating the tricky waters of politics with a sly smile and razor wit. His book might have been a satire, but More was deadly serious about the need for reform. He was challenging the status quo, questioning the blind acceptance of societal norms that served the few at the expense of the many. More's Utopia is a masterpiece not just because of its content, but because of its context. It was written at a time when Europe was on the cusp of monumental change. The Protestant Reformation was simmering, the New World was being carved up like a Thanksgiving turkey, and the printing press was making sure ideas spread faster than ever before. More, with his keen insight and sharper pen, was smack in the middle of it all, asking the hard questions and poking the bear. As we dissect Utopia, it's crucial to remember that More wasn't just lampooning his society. He was urging it to be better. He was a man who walked a fine line between idealism and realism, between the court and the commoners. And though Utopia might seem like a flight of fancy, it was grounded in a deep understanding of human nature and the flaws that come with it. So, while some might dismiss More's work as a quaint literary exercise, it's clear that Utopia was, and remains, a powerful tool for reflection and critique. It challenges us to look beyond the surface and question the very foundations of our societies. And as we explore more of More's life and legacy, we'll see how this singular work fits into the larger tapestry of a man who dared to imagine a world where things could be different, even if only on the pages of a book. As we pivot from the idealistic musings of Utopia to the gritty realities of the political arena, Thomas More's life takes on a new dimension. By 1529, More is no longer just the cheeky author of a biting satire. He's knee-deep in the murky waters of English politics as Lord Chancellor. Imagine stepping into a role where the stakes are higher than a game of Tudor-era poker, with your head quite literally on the line if you play your cards wrong. Welcome to More's political career, which is as much about surviving the whims of Henry Roman VIII as it is about governing the realm. More's ascension to Lord Chancellor, succeeding the legendary Cardinal Wolsey, was no small feat. Wolsey's fall from grace was a cautionary tale, a lesson in the precariousness of power under a king who changed wives faster than you can say annulment. More's appointment was a nod to his legal acumen, and perhaps a sign that Henry Roman VIII appreciated a good wit as much as a good counsellor. But let's not romanticize this. The chancellorship was a hot seat, and More was about to find out how hot it could get. Now, becoming Lord Chancellor in 1529 wasn't like snagging a corner office with a view. It was more akin to inheriting a medieval version of a ticking time bomb. The English Reformation was gathering steam, and the Protestant Reformation was shaking Europe like a particularly aggressive earthquake. More, a devout Catholic, found himself navigating a landscape fraught with religious turmoil and political intrigue. He was in the thick of it, trying to reconcile his moral convictions with the demands of a king who was less than thrilled with papal authority. Let's talk about More's harsh stance against Protestant reformers, because, oh boy, did he make a name for himself there. More wasn't just a passive observer in the religious tug-of-war. He was a veritable bulldog for Catholic orthodoxy. Under his tenure, heretics were hunted with the zeal of a man who believed he was defending the very soul of England. His prosecution of reformers was brutal, with 6 individuals executed for heresy during his time as Chancellor. More saw Protestantism not as a harmless theological debate, but as a threat to the moral and social fabric of his country. But here's where we take a sharp left into myth-busting territory. More's actions weren't just about religious fervor. They were deeply intertwined with the economic and social factors of the time. You see, Protestantism wasn't just a religious movement. It was a socio-political force that threatened the established order. The monasteries, with their wealth and land, were integral to the economy. Protestant reformers, with their calls for church reform and redistribution of wealth, were challenging the status quo in ways that could shake the foundations of English society, and by extension, More's own position. It's all too easy to paint More as a villain in this narrative, the pious persecutor of reformers. But remember, he was operating in a world where loyalty to the crown and the church was a delicate balancing act. More's moral compass was calibrated to a Catholic true north, and he genuinely believed that Protestantism was a dangerous deviation. The economic context can't be ignored. The church was a significant landowner, and its dissolution was a potential economic catastrophe. More's actions were as much about preserving stability as they were about religious ideology. The tension between More's idealism and the pragmatic demands of his position is palpable. On one hand, he was a man of principle, unwilling to bend his beliefs even for a king. On the other, he was a shrewd politician who understood that governing was about compromise and maneuvering through the thickets of realpolitik. More's tenure as Lord Chancellor was like walking a tightrope, with the abyss of royal displeasure on one side and the chasm of religious chaos on the other. But was More an idealist in a pragmatist's world, or a pragmatist with an idealist's heart? That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that doesn't have a simple answer. More was undoubtedly committed to his ideals, but he wasn't blind to the realities of his time. His harsh measures against reformers were, in part, a reaction to the economic and social upheavals that Protestantism threatened to unleash. At the same time, his unwavering devotion to his beliefs ultimately led to his downfall, a stark reminder that in the game of Tudor politics, the stakes were life and death. As we continue to peel back the layers of More's political career, it's clear that his story is one of complexity and contradiction. He was a man caught between the rock of his moral convictions and the hard place of political necessity. More's life as Lord Chancellor was a high-wire act, a constant juggling of ideals and realities, principles and politics. And while his time in power was marked by controversy and conflict, it also set the stage for the dramatic events that would ultimately define his legacy. More's journey from the author of Utopia to the enforcer of orthodoxy underscores the tension between the world as it is and the world as it could be. His actions were shaped by the harsh realities of his time, a reminder that idealism often meets its match in the crucible of politics. Yet, his story is also one of a man who dared to stand by his beliefs, even when the cost was higher than any earthly reward. And as we delve deeper into the events that marked the end of his career, we'll see just how far More was willing to go to stay true to himself in a world that demanded anything but. Thomas More's political tightrope act was about to face a gale-force wind in the shape of King Henry Roman VIII marital escapades. The king was embroiled in what historians now call the king's great matter, a euphemism for his desperate need to ditch Catherine of Aragon in favour of Anne Boleyn. Henry's desire for a male heir had morphed from a personal concern into a national crisis, and More was about to be caught in the crossfire. Let's set the stage. It's the 1530, and Henry Roman VIII is staring down the barrel of succession drama. Catherine, his queen, had produced a daughter, Mary, but no sons, and Anne Boleyn was not just bending Henry's ear, but also his heart. Enter the Pope, who was less than enthusiastic about annulling Henry's marriage. Why? Because Catherine's nephew, Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, had Rome under his thumb. More's Catholic convictions were as unyielding as a knight's armor, but Henry was looking for a man who could tell him what he wanted to hear. Spoiler alert, More was not that man. Here's the rub. More's loyalty was split between his faith and his king, and he was about to find out just how irreconcilable those loyalties were. Henry's solution to his matrimonial woes was to sever England's ties with the papacy and declare himself the supreme head of the Church of England. It was a bold move, akin to flipping the chessboard when the game wasn't going your way. Henry was ready to trade papal bulls for royal decrees, but More wasn't buying it. More's refusal to attend Anne's coronation in 1533 was a statement as loud as a cannon shot. It was the tipping point that marked his descent from the king's favour. Henry, who had once called More a friend, now saw him as an obstacle, and in Tudor England, obstacles were removed with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. It wasn't long before More found himself in the Tower of London, that notorious riverside residence for those who had fallen from grace. The charges against him were as murky as the Thames: treason, for refusing to take the oath of supremacy, which acknowledged Henry as the head of the church. More's silence on the matter was as eloquent as any of his speeches, but it was silence that the king found deafening. Silence may be golden, but in this case it was treasonous. In the summer of 1535, More was dragged before a tribunal at Westminster Hall. His trial was a foregone conclusion, a play with a script written in advance. The jury, handpicked and hardly impartial, took just 15 minutes to convict him. It was a judicial process that made a mockery of justice, a kangaroo court dressed up in Tudor finery. More's execution on July 6, 1535, was the final act of a tragic opera. As he mounted the scaffold, he was reported to have quipped to his executioner, "I pray you, see me safe up, and for my coming down let me shift for myself." Even in his final moments, More's wit remained as sharp as ever. His last words were a testament to his faith. "I die the king's good servant, but God's first." More's head was displayed on London Bridge as a warning to others, a grim reminder that in Henry's England, loyalty was a one-way street. But let's hit pause on the romanticized notion of martyrdom. More's death wasn't just about faith. It was the culmination of a political struggle that had left England's landscape forever altered. The economic and social upheaval that followed Henry's break from Rome was seismic. The dissolution of the monasteries, once economic and spiritual hubs, sent shockwaves through society. Land that had been in ecclesiastical hands for centuries was suddenly up for grabs, leading to a redistribution of wealth that enriched the crown and its cronies while leaving the common folk in the lurch. More's trial and execution were emblematic of the broader power struggles of the time. Henry Roman VIII's reign was marked by a blend of personal ambition and national interest, a cocktail that was as potent as it was perilous. More's fate was sealed not just by his religious convictions, but by the political tides that he could neither control nor swim against. This wasn't just a tale of a stubborn man who refused to bow to a king's whims. It was about the clash between old beliefs and new realities, a microcosm of the Tudor court's machinations. More's downfall was the result of a perfect storm of personal conviction, royal ambition, and political maneuvering. So, as we look at More's life and legacy, we should ask ourselves, was he a martyr for the ages, or a man caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? Perhaps he was both. More was a man of principle in a world where principles were often a luxury few could afford. His story is a reminder of the costs of standing by one's beliefs when the world demands compromise. As we wrap up this chapter of More's life, it's clear that his journey was one of complexity and contradiction. More was a man who dared to imagine a better world, even as he navigated the treacherous waters of Tudor politics. His life was a testament to the power of conviction, a story of a man who stood firm in his beliefs, even when the tide was against him. And as we move forward to explore the aftermath of More's execution and its impact on history, we'll see how his legacy continued to resonate long after the axe fell. As we move forward to explore the aftermath of More's execution and its impact on history, we'll see how his legacy continued to resonate long after the axe fell. Let's fast forward a few centuries. It's 1935, and the Vatican is about to give Thomas More the ultimate posthumous promotion, sainthood. Now, canonization isn't just about a halo and a spot on a stained glass window. It's a recognition of virtues that supposedly align with divine expectations. But here's the kicker. More's sainthood is as much a testament to his complex nature as it is to his steadfast faith. Thomas More's canonization came amid a backdrop of global upheaval. The world was reeling from the Great Depression, and Europe was teetering on the brink of yet another catastrophic war. The Catholic Church was searching for symbols of unwavering faith and moral integrity, qualities that More, despite his political entanglements, embodied. But let's be clear, sainthood doesn't erase the very real complexities of his life. More was a man who executed reformers in defense of his beliefs, a far cry from the peaceful image usually associated with sainthood. This duality is what makes More's legacy so fascinating. On one hand, he is celebrated as a martyr who stood firm in his refusal to acknowledge Henry Roman VIII's supremacy over the Church. On the other, he was a staunch defender of an institution that was far from perfect. The monasteries he fought to protect were not only spiritual centers, but also economic powerhouses with vast tracts of land and wealth. More's actions were as much about preserving the social order as they were about protecting the faith. But let's not put More on a pedestal without acknowledging the full scope of his contributions. His most enduring legacy isn't just his saintly status, but also utopia, that literary grenade he lobbed into the annals of history. More's Utopia has outlived his political career and even his martyrdom. The book has been translated into countless languages and remains a staple in discussions about ideal societies. While some might argue that Utopia is an exercise in fantasy, it's also a profound critique of human nature and societal structures. More's vision of a society that values merit over might, leisure over labor, and communal welfare over individual wealth is as relevant today as it was in the 16th century. In an age where socioeconomic inequality is a heart-button issue, More's critique of wealth disparity and the hoarding of resources by the elite strikes a chord. His idea of a 6-hour workday sounds almost revolutionary in today's hustle culture. Utopia continues to challenge readers to question the status quo and envision a world where justice and equality aren't just buzzwords but realities. Now, let's talk about More as a symbol for religious integrity and humanist thought. Here's a man who managed to embody the best of both worlds, a devout Catholic who was also a Renaissance humanist. More's humanism wasn't about rejecting religion, but about reconciling faith with reason. He believed in the power of education and dialogue to elevate the human spirit. In a world that often pits science against religion, More's legacy reminds us that the two can coexist in a symbiotic relationship. More's life was a tapestry of contradictions, an intellectual powerhouse who embraced both faith and reason, a political figure who dared to challenge a king, and a satirist who critiqued societal norms while navigating their treacherous waters. His story is a reminder that history isn't just a series of black and white events, but a complex interplay of ideals and realities. More's legacy is a testament to the power of conviction and the importance of questioning the world as it is, rather than accepting it at face value. In the grand scheme of things, More's sainthood, utopia, and his role as a symbol of integrity and humanism illustrate the enigmatic nature of his life and work. He was a man who dared to imagine a world that could be different, even as he grappled with the harsh realities of his own time. More's story is one of humor and tragedy, idealism and pragmatism, faith and reason. It's a story that continues to resonate, challenging us to look beyond the surface and consider the deeper questions that define our humanity. So, As we wrap up our exploration of Thomas More's life and legacy, let's remember him as a man of complexity and contradiction. A man who stood by his beliefs even when the world demanded compromise. A man whose ideas continue to inspire and provoke. More's journey is a reminder that the stories we tell about history are as much about the present as they are about the past. And as we navigate our own complex world, perhaps we can find inspiration in More's unwavering commitment to his ideals, his wit in the face of adversity, and his vision of a better society. Isaac Newton's story begins in a humble little corner of England called Woolsthorpe Manor, Lincolnshire. It's the kind of place that would be hard to pronounce after a couple of pints at the local pub. This is where Newton entered the world on January 4, 1643, almost as a premature afterthought, born 3 months early and so tiny that he could fit into a quart mug. Against all odds, this fragile infant would grow up to rewrite the very principles governing the universe. But before he got around to inventing calculus and other light bedtime reading, Newton had to survive his childhood, a feat that was not as straightforward as you might think. Growing up, young Isaac wasn't exactly the life of the party. In fact, he was about as socially adept as a hedgehog at a balloon factory. After his father died before he was even born, his mother, Hannah Icecoff, left him to be raised by his grandparents while she went off to remarry. Talk about starting life with a trust issue or two. The kid spent more time alone than a lighthouse keeper and often preferred the company of books to people, an inclination that would come in handy later on. Now, let's address that scene with the apple. You know the one. Isaac Newton sitting under a tree, minding his own business, when an apple drops on his head, and bam, gravity is discovered. It's a charming tale, sure, but it's more of a myth than a memoir. The story first pops up in a biography written by Newton's friend, William Stukeley, decades after the supposed apple incident. While Newton himself did mention pondering gravity after observing apples fall, the whole bonk-on-the-head scenario is likely just a juicy embellishment. Still, it makes for a good visual, doesn't it? And who are we to spoil a legend with the cold, hard truth? Moving on from apples and anecdotes, Newton's academic journey began earnestly when he enrolled at the King's School in Grantham. He wasn't what you call a stellar student at first. In fact, he was more interested in tinkering and making models than in listening to lessons. Let's just say he wouldn't have been voted most likely to succeed in his class. But a little altercation with a fellow student turned out to be his academic wake-up call. After a particularly heated fistfight, because apparently even future geniuses couldn't avoid schoolyard brawls, Newton decided to channel his energy into his studies. And boy, did he turn things around. By 1661, he was off to Trinity College, Cambridge, with a scholarship awarded for his now impressive academic performance. At Cambridge, Newton was like a kid in a candy store, except the candy was ancient Greek philosophy, and the kid was a budding genius with an insatiable curiosity. If knowledge was power, Newton was on a quest for nuclear energy. He immersed himself in the works of Aristotle, Descartes, and other heavyweights of intellectual history. But Newton wasn't content with just memorizing other people's theories. He was there to challenge them, overturn them, and if necessary, set them on fire. Figuratively, of course. Newton might have been a bit of a pyromaniac when it came to ideas, but actual arson wasn't his style. Newton's time at Cambridge was also marked by his legendary absent-mindedness. Picture this. You're so lost in thought you forget which way is up and which way is down, or that you even exist on the physical plane. If someone had told Newton the world was ending, he'd likely have missed the memo while pondering an equation about it. There's a story that he once got so engrossed in a problem that he forgot to eat. His servants, concerned for his well-being, would leave food by his side, only to find it untouched hours later. If there's one thing Newton proved, it's that genius and common sense don't always go hand in hand. Despite his social awkwardness and tendency to drift off into his own world, Newton was making waves in academia. By 1667, he was elected a Fellow of Trinity College, and just 2 years later, he became the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics. Not bad for a kid who started out as a somewhat neglected loner in Lincolnshire. This position wasn't just a title to add to his business card. It gave him the freedom to explore the universe's mysteries without having to worry about teaching undergrads how to count. Newton's early work at Cambridge laid the foundation for what would later become his magnum opus, the Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, or just Principia if you're on a first-name basis with groundbreaking scientific texts. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's appreciate the fact that Newton was, at his core, a man who questioned everything. He wasn't afraid to upend centuries of established thought, all while likely forgetting where he left his quill pen. Newton's story is one of transformation, from a frail child in rural England to a colossus of scientific thought, with a few quirks and social faux pas along the way. In the end, Newton's early life is a testament to the idea that brilliance often comes wrapped in the package of oddity. His journey from the quiet fields of Lincolnshire to the intellectual crucible of Cambridge set the stage for his later triumphs and discoveries. It's a reminder that genius doesn't always look like we expect it to, and that sometimes it takes a bit of myth to reveal the humanity behind the legend. Isaac Newton's early life might have laid the foundation, but it was his later work that truly sent shockwaves through the halls of academia, and not just because he was rumored to have once used a window as an impromptu exit during a particularly dull lecture. Enter calculus and optics, two disciplines that would not only cement his legacy, but also embroil him in a feud so famous it makes modern academic rivalries look like playground squabbles. Let's start with calculus, because why not kick things off with the subject that still sends shivers down the spines of math students everywhere? Newton's development of calculus, or the method of fluxions, as he charmingly called it, was like discovering a new continent in the realm of mathematics. It was the 1660, and while the rest of the world was busy dealing with the Great Plague or the Great Fire of London, Newton was holed up in his room at Cambridge, essentially inventing a whole new way to understand change and motion. Forget YOLO, Newton was living the you only limit once life. But here's where things get spicy. Across the channel, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, a German polymath with a penchant for multitasking, was cooking up something suspiciously similar. Both men claim to have developed calculus independently, but who had the idea first? Well, it's about as clear as mud, and the ensuing controversy would become the 17th century equivalent of a Twitter feud, complete with passive-aggressive pamphlets instead of tweets. Leibniz published his findings first in 1684, but Newton had been secretly working out the kinks since 1666. It's a classic case of he said, with no clear arbiter because, well, the internet wasn't around to document every petty exchange. The Royal Society of London, of which Newton was a prominent member, eventually weighed in, but let's just say their impartiality was about as suspect as a fox judging a henhouse beauty pageant. They sided with Newton, which was convenient given that he was the Society's president. The feud spiraled into a full-blown academic brawl, complete with accusations of plagiarism and enough intellectual mudslinging to fill a Renaissance fair. It was the kind of rivalry that makes you wonder if the real secret to genius isn't intelligence, but rather an unyielding commitment to being the last one standing. While calculus was causing a kerfuffle, Newton was simultaneously revolutionizing how we see the world, literally. His work in optics was groundbreaking, not least because it involved poking holes in the existing theories of light. In 1666, while others were busy trying not to catch the plague, Newton was conducting experiments that involved shining light through prisms and discovering that white light was actually made up of the colors of the rainbow. It was a revelation that seemed to defy common sense, much like the fact that people back then thought bathing was optional during a pandemic. Newton detailed these findings in his book, Optics, published in 1704, which delved into the nature of light and color with the kind of detail that would give a modern-day Instagram filter a run for its money. The book laid the groundwork for the wave-particle duality of light, a concept that wouldn't be fully fleshed out until the 20th century. If that sounds a bit like science fiction, remember this was a time when witches were still a socially acceptable explanation for a bad harvest. Newton was playing 4D chess while everyone else was stuck on checkers. But like any good episode of a historical drama, the optics saga came with its own side of controversy. Renowned scientist Robert Hooke, no stranger to intellectual disputes himself, challenged Newton's theories on light. Hooke wasn't just anybody. He was a founding member of the Royal Society, and had a reputation for being as sharp-tongued as he was brilliant. The clash between Newton and Hooke was less about the specifics of their theories and more about the collision of two colossal egos in a cramped intellectual arena. Newton, ever the introvert, didn't take kindly to criticism, and Hooke was about as tactful as a bull in a china shop. Their correspondence, if you could call it that, was more akin to a series of thinly veiled insults exchanged through formal letters. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the apple. Yes, we've already debunked the myth of Newton discovering gravity via a rogue fruit, but apples weren't just a metaphorical headache for Newton. They were also part of his experiments in optics, where he used them to demonstrate his findings on light refraction. It's a reminder of how often the simplest objects can become the most profound tools in the hands of a genius. And perhaps, in a way, it's fitting that the humble apple became a symbol of Newton's work. After all, his discoveries were as fundamental and nourishing to science as apples are to a balanced diet. As we wade through the muck of Newton's academic battles, it's important to appreciate the sheer audacity of his pursuits. This was a man who didn't just question the status quo. He dismantled it, piece by piece, and then rebuilt it in his own image. His work in calculus and optics not only reshaped mathematics and physics, but also set the stage for the Enlightenment, a period where reason and rationality would begin to supersede superstition and dogma. In the end, Newton's legacy is a tapestry woven with both triumph and turmoil. His contributions were monumental, yet his path was littered with disputes that were as much about personality as they were about principle. The story of Newton and Leibniz, Newton and Hooke, and all the others who crossed his path is a testament to the fact that genius is rarely a solitary endeavor, even when it appears that way. It's a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is often as messy and contentious as it is noble and enlightening. So, as we leave Newton amidst his calculations and conundrums, remember that the real magic of his story isn't just in the equations he solved, but in the human drama that unfolded around them. Science may be about facts and figures, but history is about the people who dared to question them. And Newton, for all his quirks and quarrels, dared like few others. All right, Newton fans, buckle up, because we're about to dive into an era when our favorite mathematician traded his apple for a magnifying glass and stepped into the shadowy world of counterfeiters and coins. If you thought Newton was all about calculus and light, wait until you hear about his side gig as the 17th century version of Sherlock Holmes. By the way, he wasn't just solving mysteries. He was solving one of England's most pressing economic issues. Welcome to the Royal Mint, where Newton added a little espionage to his scientific resume. In 1696, Newton took on the role of Warden of the Royal Mint, a position that was about as exciting as a paperclip factory on a Sunday, at least on paper. Traditionally, it was a sinecure, a cushy job with more perks than responsibilities. But Newton, being Newton, took a look at those dusty ledgers and saw a puzzle begging to be solved. England was facing a currency crisis so severe it made modern inflation look like a minor inconvenience. Counterfeiters were running amok, debasing the currency faster than you could say economic collapse. The silver coins in circulation were being clipped and forged at an alarming rate, causing a real headache for anyone trying to buy a loaf of bread without needing a calculator. Newton decided that a hands-on approach was the only way to tackle the chaos. He transformed the Royal Mint into the front line of a war against counterfeiters. And when I say war, I mean it. Newton wasn't content to just sit behind a desk and hope for the best. No, he rolled up his sleeves and got to work, employing a network of spies and informants to track down the criminal masterminds behind the forgeries. It was like a game of high-stakes hide-and-seek, with Newton leveraging his analytical brilliance to outsmart the bad guys. His most infamous adversary was William Challoner, a notorious counterfeiter who was almost as clever as our man Newton. Challoner had been flooding the market with fake coins and was bold enough to publicly accuse the mint of incompetence, even suggesting they hire him to improve operations. Talk about chutzpah. Newton, however, was not amused. He launched a relentless campaign to bring Challoner to justice, digging through evidence and building a case with the precision of a seasoned detective. It culminated in 1699 when he cornered Challoner in court with enough evidence to secure a conviction. Challoner's fate, a one-way ticket to the gallows. Crime didn't pay back then, especially when Newton was on the case. Now, you might wonder why Newton, the father of modern physics, was moonlighting as a crime buster. Well, the economic implications were enormous. England was on the brink of financial disaster, and stabilizing the currency was crucial for the nation's prosperity. Remember, this was an era when wealth was often measured in coins, not credit cards or cryptocurrencies. A stable currency was essential for trade, both domestically and internationally. Newton's reforms at the mint helped restore public confidence in the nation's money supply, underpinning the financial system that would fuel the burgeoning British Empire. Politically, Newton's work reflected the era's preoccupation with security and control. The late 17th century was a period of intense political intrigue, with the Glorious Revolution of 1688 having just reshaped the monarchy. Ensuring economic stability was a priority for William Roman III government, and Newton's efforts directly supported this agenda. His meticulous approach to the mint's operations mirrored the broader quest for order in a time of turbulent change. In addition to his crime-fighting exploits, Newton made significant improvements to the mint's operations. He introduced the milling of coins, a process that made it much harder to clip the edges without detection. This little innovation was a game-changer, akin to inventing the PIN code for your debit card. Newton's attention to detail and insistence on accuracy were legendary. He personally supervised the weighing and assaying of coins. It was the kind of dedication that would make even the most detail-oriented accountant blush. Despite his triumphs, Newton's time at the mint wasn't all sleuthing and silver. He faced his fair share of bureaucratic headaches, rivalries, and the occasional political entanglement. But in true Newtonian fashion, he navigated these challenges with his characteristic mix of genius and stubborn determination. By the time he became master of the mint in 1699, he had already left an indelible mark on the institution, turning it from a den of inefficiency into a model of precision and security. So there you have it, folks. Newton wasn't just the man who figured out gravity and calculus. He was also a financial reformer and a crime-fighting mathematician. His time at the Royal Mint is a testament to his versatility and his relentless pursuit of solutions to the problems of his day. It's a chapter of his life that shows us how genius can manifest in the most unexpected places, whether it's the apple orchard or the coinage office. As we close this episode, remember that the real story of Newton is one of many layers. He was a scientist, a detective, and a public servant, all rolled into one. His legacy in the world of finance and law enforcement is as intriguing as his contributions to science, proving once again that genius knows no bounds. And as we continue this historical journey, prepare to uncover even more facets of Newton's remarkable life. Because if there's one thing Newton's story teaches us, it's that there's always more than meets the eye. But let's not hang up our powdered wigs just yet, because Newton's story didn't end with him playing financial superhero. While he was busy putting counterfeiters out of business, he was also rising through the ranks of the scientific elite. In 1703, he took the helm as president of the Royal Society, a position he held until his death in 1727. Now, if you think that sounds like a cushy job where you just shake hands and nod sagely, think again. The Royal Society was the epicenter of scientific innovation and intellectual infighting, and Newton, never one to back down from a good spat, found himself at the center of more than one scientific skirmish. First up on the list of Newton's infamous feuds was his ongoing rivalry with Robert Hooke. If academic squabbles were a sport, these two would be the heavyweight champions. Hooke, who had his own impressive resume including Hooke's law of elasticity, was something of an intellectual sparring partner for Newton. Unfortunately, their relationship was less about friendly debate and more about mutual disdain. When Newton published his Principia, Hooke accused him of stealing the inverse square law, a key idea in gravitational theory, from Hooke's own work. Newton, never one to take criticism lightly, responded by systematically removing any reference to Hooke's contributions from subsequent editions of his work. Petty, perhaps. Effective, definitely. Despite the drama, Newton's presidency wasn't just about settling old scores. He was instrumental in transforming the Royal Society into a powerhouse of scientific thought. expanding its influence and ensuring that it remained a premier institution for scientific inquiry. Under his leadership, the Society published numerous groundbreaking papers and facilitated the exchange of ideas across Europe. Newton's vision for the Society was clear. Science should be rigorous, free from the shackles of superstition, and above all, thoroughly Newtonian. Speaking of shackles, let's talk about Newton's fascination with alchemy, a pursuit that seems as out of place in his life as bacon at a vegan brunch. Alchemy, the medieval forerunner to chemistry, was all about the transmutation of base metals into gold and discovering the philosopher's stone, a mythical substance that could grant immortality. It sounds like the stuff of fantasy novels, but in Newton's day, alchemy was a serious business. And Newton, ever the polymath, dove headfirst into the murky waters of the alchemical arts. Now, you might be wondering how the same man who gave us the laws of motion could also be hunting for magical elixirs. The truth is, Newton saw no contradiction here. In the 17th century, the boundaries between science and mysticism were as blurred as a Monet painting. Many intellectuals believed that alchemy held the keys to understanding the natural world, and Newton was no exception. He filled countless notebooks with cryptic symbols and formulas, devoting hours to experiments that would have made even the most ardent fantasy fan raise an eyebrow. But was it all just a wild goose chase? Not entirely. Newton's alchemical work, while not yielding gold or the secret to eternal life, did contribute to his broader understanding of chemistry. He meticulously recorded the results of his experiments, and his methods, rooted in empirical observation and rigorous testing, laid the groundwork for modern chemistry. Plus, let's be honest, if anyone was going to turn lead into gold, it was going to be the guy who turned apples into gravity. Of course, Newton's later years weren't just spent in the company of alchemical texts and scientific papers. As he aged, he became increasingly cantankerous, a trait that seemed to grow in tandem with his fame. By the time he reached his 70s, Newton had evolved into a full-fledged curmudgeon, the kind who might have yelled at kids to get off his lawn if he hadn't been too busy contemplating the laws of the universe. His irascibility was legendary, and he was known to hold grudges with the tenacity of a bulldog with a bone. A prime example of his stubbornness was his ongoing feud with John Flamsteed, the astronomer royal. Flamsteed had been working on a star catalogue, a painstaking endeavor that was essential for navigation and astronomy. Newton, eager to use Flamsteed's data for his own work, grew impatient with the astronomer's meticulous pace. When Flamsteed refused to hand over his observations, Newton used his position as president of the Royal Society to compel their publication, a move that Flamsteed considered a betrayal of trust. The resulting conflict was a bitter one, with Newton going so far as to seize Flamsteed's papers and publish them without his consent. It was the kind of academic arm wrestling that makes you wonder if Newton was secretly auditioning for a role in a historical soap opera. Despite his often prickly demeanor, Newton's later life was also marked by immense respect and recognition. He was knighted by Queen Anne in 1705, becoming Sir Isaac Newton. Thank you very much. It was a testament to his unparalleled contributions to science and his status as a national icon. Although one suspects the Queen might have thought twice about handing him a sword if she'd known about his penchant for grudges. As we inch closer to the end of Newton's story, it's clear that his later years were as complex and contradictory as the man himself. On one hand, he was the embodiment of the Enlightenment, a champion of reason and empirical evidence. On the other, he was a man of deep-seated beliefs and mystical pursuits, unafraid to venture where others dared not tread. His intellectual pursuits were as varied as a modern-day streaming service, offering everything from groundbreaking science to arcane alchemical recipes. In the end, Newton's life was a tapestry of brilliance and eccentricity, a reminder that genius often comes wrapped in the most unexpected of packages. His legacy is a testament to the power of curiosity and the relentless pursuit of truth, irrespective of where that journey might lead. As we leave Newton for now, poised on the cusp of his final years, we're reminded that the story of science is as much about the people who dared to dream as it is about the discoveries they made. Stay tuned, because there's more to come in this saga of the man who dared to decode the universe, and occasionally to pick a fight with it. The final act of Newton's life is like the closing scene of a blockbuster movie. The hero, having battled foes both intellectual and personal, stands triumphant, albeit a bit weathered, as the curtain falls. It's time to unpack the myth from the man, a task as complex as Newton's own equations. Oh, Newton, our beloved, irascible genius, who managed to revolutionize science while occasionally getting lost in the maze of his own mind. First up, let's talk about his most famous works, the laws of motion and universal gravitation. Published in 1687 in his magnum opus, the Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica. Try saying that 3 times fast. Newton's laws didn't just nudge the door of scientific understanding ajar, they kicked it wide open. Before Newton, the universe was a bit like a teenager's bedroom, chaotic, mysterious, and largely misunderstood. Newton cleaned it up, showing that the motion of everything from falling apples to orbiting planets could be explained with 3 simple laws. You know the ones. An object in motion stays in motion. Force equals mass times acceleration, and every action has an equal and opposite reaction. They might sound straightforward today, but back then, it was like Newton handed everyone a map in a world where people had been wandering aimlessly. His law of universal gravitation was equally groundbreaking. Newton proposed that every particle of matter in the universe attracts every other particle with a force that is directly proportional to the product of their masses and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. In less nerdy terms, gravity isn't just a thing that happens. It's a cosmic hug that keeps the universe from flying apart. This wasn't just a new way to look at physics. It was a seismic shift in how humanity understood its place in the cosmos. Suddenly, the heavens weren't governed by divine whim, but by principles that could be calculated and predicted. These ideas didn't just transform science, they reshaped an entire epoch. The Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason and empirical evidence, was fueled by Newton's revelations. His work laid the groundwork for subsequent titans of science like Einstein, who built upon Newtonian physics with the theory of relativity. Einstein famously remarked, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." And who was the giant he was talking about? Our boy Isaac, of course. But while Newton's scientific achievements were towering, the man himself was a bundle of contradictions. For all his rational brilliance, he was deeply superstitious. He spent years delving into alchemy and biblical prophecies, convinced that hidden truths lay within. It's like finding out your favorite chef is obsessed with making toast, hoping one day it'll turn into a gourmet meal. These pursuits, while seemingly at odds with his scientific rigor, speak to the complexity of a man who was never content with surface explanations. Newton saw the universe as a vast puzzle, one he was determined to solve, even if it meant going down some peculiar rabbit holes. Socially, Newton was about as approachable as a porcupine at a petting zoo. He preferred the company of books and experiments to people, which didn't exactly make him the life of 17th century parties, not that he would have been caught dead at one. His personal life was, to put it mildly, sparse. There's no record of any romantic entanglements, leading some historians to speculate about his sexuality, or lack thereof. But perhaps he simply found human relationships too messy compared to the elegance of mathematics. After all, numbers don't gossip or hold grudges. Newton's quirks didn't stop him from becoming a celebrated figure in his own time. He was buried with full honors in Westminster Abbey, a resting place fit for royalty and notable thinkers. It's a testament to how much he was revered, despite, or maybe, because of his eccentricities. The public saw him as a symbol of human genius, a man who had unlocked the secrets of the universe. Yet, beneath the accolades, Newton remained a man of profound contradictions, driven by a relentless curiosity that didn't always adhere to conventional wisdom. Economically, his contributions were just as significant. By stabilizing the currency as master of the mint, he laid the foundation for a burgeoning British economy that would dominate global trade. His reforms helped England transition from a feudal economy to a capitalist powerhouse, proving that the right man in the right position could indeed change the world. Politically, his work reflected a time when nations were beginning to appreciate the power of science and technology as tools of statecraft. Monarchs and governments were waking up to the realization that controlling knowledge and innovation could be as powerful as armies and navies. Newton's role at the Royal Society and the Mint placed him at the intersection of science and policy, where he wielded influence with the same precision as his mathematical calculations. As we conclude, let's address the mythos surrounding Newton. The image of him sitting under an apple tree, discovering gravity with a bonk on the head, is a charming fiction, one that persists because it encapsulates the wonder of discovery. It's a neat story, an accessible metaphor for a mind that was anything but simple. Yet the reality is even more compelling. Newton was a man who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be understood, and he dedicated his life to bridging that gap. In the end, Newton's legacy is not just a collection of laws and theories, but a testament to the power of human intellect and the importance of curiosity. He showed us that the world is knowable, that the universe's mysteries can be unraveled with patience, logic, and a touch of daring. His life is a reminder that genius often comes wrapped in enigma, that the most profound truths can emerge from the most unlikely places. So, as we close the book on Sir Isaac Newton, remember this. The next time you see an apple, think not of the myth, but of the man who dared to question why it fell. Because in that questioning, Newton didn't just change science. He changed humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos. And that, dear friends, is a legacy that will endure as long as apples fall from trees and humans look up at the stars in wonder. If you ever thought location wasn't everything, just ask the kingdom of Aksum. Nestled in what's now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea, Aksum was the ancient world's equivalent of prime real estate. Think of it as the Beverly Hills of antiquity, but instead of palm trees and paparazzi, you had ivory and incense. Aksum's geographical perks were so good, even the guards might have been a bit envious. Smack dab in the crossroads of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, Aksum had front-row seats to the Red Sea, the ancient world's superhighway for trade. If you imagine the Red Sea as a bustling interstate, Aksum was the all-you-can-eat diner right off the exit, serving up some of the finest goods known to man. The kingdom's location wasn't just a happy accident, it was a strategic jackpot. Traders from as far as Rome and India flocked to its markets, eager to swap spices, textiles, and maybe a few tall tales, too. The Aksumites were no dummies. They knew they were sitting on a gold mine, literally and figuratively. Their coins, one of the first in the world to feature a cross, by the way, were minted from gold and served as an ancient Yelp review for their prosperity. Around 1st century CE, these coins began circulating, and they were a hit. If you were a trader in the ancient world, you'd probably find Aksumite currency clinking in your satchel. It was like carrying a little piece of Aksum with you wherever you went. But hold your horses, or your camels, in this case, because Aksum's rise wasn't just about being in the right place at the right time. Oh no, these guys were savvy political operators. Early Aksumite leaders weren't content with just cashing in on their locale. They wanted a piece of the political pie too. They played the ancient game of thrones like chess grandmasters. Establishing control over the surrounding regions, they flexed their muscles and showed off their diplomatic chops. They even had their own version of a political PR campaign. Aksumite rulers were fond of erecting massive stone obelisks known as stelae, towering over 20 meters high. These weren't just random acts of architectural whimsy. They were billboards in stone, shouting to the heavens about their power and prestige. The most famous of these, the obelisk of Aksum, was a 24-meter-tall monument proclaiming to everyone within a 100-mile radius that Aksum was not to be trifled with. Now, let's talk trade. The Aksumites were like the original startup founders, except instead of apps, they had spices, ivory, and gold. The Red Sea trade network was their playground, and they knew how to work it to their advantage. Aksum was the bridge between the Roman and Indian worlds, and they milked that role for all it was worth. If you wanted to move goods from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, Aksum was your go-to-middleman. Their ports buzzed with activity, teeming with merchants, sailors, and perhaps a few opportunistic pirates looking for a quick score. But don't let the romantic notion of bustling markets fool you. The Aksumites were shrewd operators who knew the harsh realities of trade. They imposed taxes and tariffs on goods passing through their territory, raking in revenue that would make a modern tax collector swoon. This wasn't just about lining their pockets. It was part of a larger strategy to maintain control over their domain and keep the gold flowing. Of course, every good story comes with a pinch of myth, and Aksum has its share. One of the most tantalizing tales is that of the Queen of Sheba, who supposedly hailed from the Aksum region. While the truth of her existence is as murky as the Red Sea in a storm, the legend endures, painting Aksum as a land of mystery and allure. In reality, the kingdom was a hub of innovation and strategy, a place where savvy leaders capitalized on their location and resources to build a powerhouse. In the grand tapestry of history, Aksum was a vibrant thread, weaving connections between continents and cultures. It was a kingdom that understood the power of place, the brilliance of political maneuvering, and the art of trade. Aksum may have been ancient, but its lessons are anything but obsolete. After all, even in today's world, it's all about location, 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 and a little bit of cunning never hurts. And speaking of ancient cunning, let's dive into the social structure of Aksum, where the societal ladder was more like a jungle gym, complete with elephants. Yes, you heard that right. Elephants trumpeted their way into the aristocratic circles of Aksum as status symbols. Forget gold chains. If you were truly someone in Aksum, you had an elephant. These majestic creatures were more than just the original luxury SUV. They were living, breathing symbols of power and wealth. The elite paraded them around like four-legged trophies, a testament to their ability to harness resources and influence. At the top of this social hierarchy sat the kings, who ruled with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. The monarchs of Aksum weren't just political figureheads. They were considered semi-divine, bridging the mortal and the ethereal. It was like having your local mayor also be a demigod, a pretty sweet gig if you can get it. These kings, such as King Ezana in the early 4th century CE, were not only rulers, but also trendsetters. Ezana famously converted to Christianity, making Aksum one of the first African kingdoms to adopt the faith, long before Instagram influencers were pushing wellness retreats in Bali. Below the kings, you'd find the nobility and wealthy merchants, the ancient world's equivalent of today's boardroom bigwigs and social media moguls. They were the ones driving Aksum's economic engine, turning the gears of trade and commerce. With their fingers in every pie, from gold mining to ivory trading, these highflyers had their own version of the stock market, and they knew how to play it. The economy of Aksum was like a well-oiled machine, powered by the steady flow of gold coins that were both a currency and a status symbol. Picture this. Carrying a pouch of Aksumite coins was like walking around with a brand new smartphone. Everyone knew you were living large. Now, let's not forget the middle tier, artisans, craftsmen, and traders. These folks were the backbone of Aksum's prosperity, the unsung heroes who kept the kingdom's economy humming. They worked tirelessly, producing goods that fed the ever-hungry trade networks. From intricately woven textiles to finely crafted jewelry, these skilled workers were the ancient equivalent of Etsy sellers, minus the internet, but with all the creativity. Their products were in high demand, and their craftsmanship was a testament to Aksum's cultural vibrancy. And then there were the commoners and farmers, the salt of the Aksumite earth. They toiled the land and kept the kingdom fed, a crucial yet often overlooked piece of the puzzle. While they didn't have elephants or gold coins, they contributed to Aksum's success in their own way. Their labor was the foundation upon which the kingdom's prosperity was built, even if their names didn't make it into the history books. These were the folks who understood the true meaning of hard work long before it became a hashtag. But let's not romanticize it too much. Life wasn't all sunshine and incense. The harsh reality was that social mobility in Aksum was more of a pipe dream than a possibility. If you were born a farmer, chances were you'd die a farmer, your only hope for upward movement being reincarnation as a wealthy merchant in your next life. The lines were as rigid as the stelae that darted the landscape, and breaking through them was about as easy as moving one of those 24-meter-tall obelisks with your bare hands. While the social structure was firmly set in stone, the economic life of Aksum was as dynamic as a bustling marketplace. The kingdom's coffers were filled by the steady stream of gold coins, minted with precision and care. These coins were not just a medium of exchange. They were a declaration of Aksum's wealth and influence. The Aksumites were pioneers in numismatics, showcasing their rulers' faces and Christian crosses long before selfies and hashtags became a thing. Each coin was a tiny ambassador, spreading the gospel of Aksum's prosperity far and wide. Trade was the lifeblood of Aksum, an intricate web spun across continents. Gold, ivory, and exotic animals were the big-ticket items, the luxury goods that set Aksum apart from its contemporaries. But let's not overlook the more mundane commodities like salt and agricultural products, which were just as critical to the economy. The Aksumites were savvy traders, understanding that while gold sparkles, it's the bread and butter that keep people coming back. They knew the value of diversification long before it became a buzzword in business school. Now, if you think the Aksumites were just sitting around counting their money, think again. They were constantly innovating, finding new ways to enhance their trade networks and expand their influence. They established diplomatic ties with far-flung empires, from the Romans to the Persians, playing the geopolitical chessboard like seasoned pros. It was a delicate balancing act, navigating the shifting sands of international relations while keeping their own house in order. And what about those ancient influencers? No, they didn't have Instagram, but they had something better: word of mouth. Aksum's reputation as a prosperous and powerful kingdom spread like wildfire, carried by travelers, traders, and the occasional wayward sailor. The tales of Aksumite wealth and grandeur were the stuff of legend, capturing the imagination of people far and wide. In a way, the Aksumites were the original storytellers, crafting narratives that would endure for centuries. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. Behind the glittering facade of prosperity lay the harsh realities of life in ancient Aksum. Political intrigue, social stratification, and economic pressures were as much a part of the story as the gold and glory. The kingdom's success was built on a foundation of hard work, strategic thinking, and a little bit of luck. It was a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of its people, who understood that in the game of history, nothing is ever truly guaranteed. So, as we leave the story of Aksum's social and economic fabric hanging tantalizingly in the air, remember that this was a kingdom that knew the art of balance, between tradition and innovation, wealth and responsibility, myth and reality. And while the elephants may have been the stars of the show, it was the people of Aksum who truly made history, one coin, one trade, and one story at a time. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the intricate tapestry of Aksum's legacy, with more twists, turns, and elephants to come. So, as we delve into the spiritual tapestry of Aksum, imagine a world where your spiritual playlist was a smorgasbord of divine tunes, with a little something for every soul. Before Christianity came knocking, Aksumite religion was like a cosmic buffet of polytheism. You had gods for rain, gods for war, and probably a god to help you find your misplaced sandals. It was a divine free-for-all, and everyone was invited. Now, here's where things get spicy. Enter King Ezana in the early 4th century CE, a monarch who knew how to make headlines before there were newspapers. Ezana's conversion to Christianity was like the ancient equivalent of a celebrity endorsement. Imagine a modern pop star suddenly swapping their usual chart toppers for hymns. Ezana's move was just as earth-shattering. But was it genuine faith or a political power play? Let's just say the jury's still out, and the historical press releases are as clear as mud. Before we crown Ezana the ancient patron saint of influencers, let's break down the context. Christianity was spreading faster than a cat video on social media, thanks to the Roman Empire's newfound love affair with the faith. Rome was putting its considerable muscle behind the cross, and suddenly, being Christian was the new black. For Ezana, aligning with this rising tide was a strategic masterstroke. If you could have Rome on your speed dial, or whatever the 4th century equivalent was, why wouldn't you? Ezana's conversion wasn't just a personal epiphany, it was a seismic shift that sent ripples through Aksumite society. This wasn't just about switching divine allegiances, it was about rewriting the kingdom's entire social script. Imagine the Aksumite version of a Facebook relationship status update, and you're halfway there. The conversion marked a break from the past, a bold declaration that Aksum was ready to mingle with the big leagues of the ancient world. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. Not everyone in Aksum was thrilled about this new chapter. The old guard, those who'd been faithful to the pantheon of gods, probably felt like they'd shown up to a toga party only to find everyone in business suits. The shift to Christianity wasn't just a religious change, it was a cultural revolution. Suddenly, the old symbols and rituals were out, and the cross was in. This was more than a fashion faux pas. It was a full-blown identity crisis for some. But here's the kicker. Ezana's conversion wasn't just about personal piety or political savvy. It was a masterclass in statecraft. By adopting Christianity, Aksum positioned itself as a peer to the mighty Romans, a savvy move that opened up new diplomatic channels and trade opportunities. It was like getting a backstage pass to the ancient world's most exclusive club. You didn't just get the spiritual benefits, you got the social and economic perks too. Of course, the big question remains, was Ezana's conversion a genuine act of faith or a calculated political maneuver? History, as usual, doesn't give us a straight answer, but that's the beauty of it. The lines between belief and strategy are as blurry as an ancient map in a sandstorm. What we do know is that Ezana's decision reshaped Aksumite society, creating a new social order that intertwined faith and politics in ways that were as complex as they were compelling. This religious evolution didn't happen in a vacuum. It was a response to the swirling forces of geopolitics, economics, and cultural exchange. Aksum wasn't just reacting to the winds of change, it was actively shaping them. By embracing Christianity, Aksum signaled to the world that it was a player on the global stage, ready to dance to the beat of a different drum, or in this case, a different hymn. But let's not get too lost in the romance of it all. Behind the scenes, Aksumite society was grappling with the realities of this transformation. Old power structures were challenged, new alliances were forged, and the social fabric was stretched to its limits. It was a time of both turmoil and opportunity, a reminder that progress often comes with a side of chaos. As we leave the story of Aksum's religious evolution hanging in the air like incense smoke, remember that this was a kingdom that knew how to adapt, innovate, and thrive in a world of change. The conversion to Christianity was just one chapter in a much larger narrative, a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of a people who understood that, in the game of history, faith and strategy often go hand in hand. And as we prepare to dive deeper into the legacy of Aksum, keep in mind that the kingdom's story is far from over. The echoes of its past continue to resonate, reminding us that history is not just about the events that happened, but the stories we tell about them. So stay tuned as we continue to unravel the threads of Aksum's legacy, with more twists, turns, and divine interventions to come. As the drama of Aksum's religious evolution settles into the background, the kingdom's gaze turned outward, across the vast blue plains of the Red Sea. If you've ever thought diplomacy was just for pencil pushers, think again. In Aksum, it was more akin to a high-stakes game of chess, where the bishops might actually be on horseback and rooks occasionally swapped for spears. This was international relations with a side of adrenaline. The Aksumites were masters of this ancient chessboard, and what they lacked in modern technology, they more than made up for with strategic savvy. Their influence spilled over the shores of Africa into the Arabian Peninsula, a region as rich in opportunity as it was in sand. By the late 3rd century CE, Aksumite power was casting a long shadow across these lands, their reach extending into what is now Yemen. And why not? The peninsula was the crossroads of trade routes leading to India, Persia, and the Roman Empire, a veritable treasure map of economic opportunity. Let's put it this way. If trade was the currency of power, then Aksum was rolling in it. They didn't just want to be the brokers of trade, they wanted to control it. And to do that, they needed footholds beyond their African borders. Enter the Himyarite kingdom, a tantalizing target for Aksum's ambitions. Situated in modern-day Yemen, it was a land as fertile in resources as it was in political intrigue, a perfect playground for the Aksumite strategies. Aksum's ventures into this territory were not just about planting flags and claiming land. Oh no, they had bigger fish to fry, or rather, spices to trade. They engaged in what can only be described as aggressive diplomacy, a kind of ancient realpolitik, where the carrot and stick approach was often accompanied by a sword. One noble venture was the reign of King Caleb around the early 6th century CE, who took a particular interest in the Arabian Sea. His military campaigns against the Himyarites weren't just exercises in territorial expansion, but were also steeped in religious overtones, aimed at supporting Christian communities over there. Talk about mixing business with divine intervention. Caleb's exploits are a textbook case of Aksumite strategy, combining military might with religious and economic motives. It's said that he led a significant campaign against the Himyarite king Dhu-Nuwas, who had been persecuting Christians, a kind of early medieval humanitarian intervention, if you will. But do we buy the whole story? Historical accounts are like ancient scrolls. Sometimes the ink is a bit smudged. While Caleb's mission was undoubtedly framed as a righteous cause, There's no denying the strategic allure of controlling a region that was a gateway to lucrative trade routes. The result: Aksumite soldiers, reportedly numbering in the tens of thousands, crossed the Red Sea to engage in what could be seen as a crusade before crusades were even a thing. They were successful, at least initially, and Caleb's forces installed a Christian puppet ruler in Himyar. It was a classic power play, setting up a friendly regime that would hopefully open doors, or ports, rather, to Aksumite interests. But like any chess game, the victory was temporary. Control of the region would ebb and flow like the tides of the Red Sea, with the Aksumites eventually pulling back as the sands of power shifted. And what about the myth of Aksum as some benevolent big brother to the Arabian Peninsula? It's a tantalizing image, but let's not kid ourselves. Aksum's moves were as much about power and profit as they were about piety. Sure, they wore the cloak of religious righteousness, but underneath was a hard-nosed calculation of geopolitical gain. It's a tale as old as time, where ideals and interests dance a complicated waltz, each trying to lead the other. In the grand game of ancient geopolitics, Aksum's ventures into Arabia were a testament to their ambition and adaptability. They knew that to thrive, they needed more than just a stronghold in Africa. They needed a foot in every major trade route and a hand in every lucrative part. It was a strategy that required both cunning and courage, two things the Aksumites had in spades. Even as Aksum flexed its muscles across the Red Sea, it was still playing the diplomatic field closer to home. Their relationships with the Roman Empire were particularly noteworthy. While the Romans were busy with their own brand of global domination, they recognized Aksum's strategic importance. The two empires maintained a relationship that was part allyship, part rivalry, a delicate dance of mutual respect and occasional tension. It was a classic case of keeping your friends close and your trading partners closer. The Aksumites' ability to navigate this complex web of alliances and enmities was nothing short of genius. They were adept at leveraging their position as a bridge between the Roman and Indian worlds, turning potential conflicts into profitable exchanges. It was a strategy that kept Aksum in the game, long after other kingdoms had crumbled into obscurity. Yet, for all their prowess, Aksum's story is also one of missed opportunities and inevitable decline. As the centuries rolled on, the kingdom faced challenges that even their strategic acumen couldn't overcome. Climate change, shifting trade routes, and internal strife would all play a part in Aksum's eventual fade from the limelight. But that's a story for another day. For now, remember that Aksum was a kingdom that played the game of history with both finesse and ferocity. They knew that power wasn't just about the size of your army or the weight of your gold, but about the alliances you forge and the moves you make on the global chessboard. So as we prepare to delve deeper into Aksum's legacy, keep in mind that this was a kingdom that understood the art of the possible, long before it became a diplomatic cliché. Stay tuned for more as we continue to unravel the intricate tapestry of Aksum's history, with more twists, turns, strategic gambits to come. As the curtain begins to fall on the kingdom of Aksum, the plot takes a darker, more complex twist, one that doesn't end with a neat bow, but rather a tangled web of challenges that even the savviest Aksumite strategist couldn't unravel. Picture an empire once basking in the glow of its golden age, now grappling with forces beyond its control. If the kingdom were to write its own breakup letter to history, it might start with, "It's not you, it's climate change." You see, by the 7th century CE, the climate decided to play a cruel joke on Aksum, throwing in a dash of prolonged droughts just to keep things interesting. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it was a full-blown crisis. Agriculture, the backbone of Aksum's economy, buckled under the pressure of decreasing rainfall, like a once mighty ox struggling to pull a plow through parched fields. The land that once yielded bountiful harvests now offered little more than dust and desperation. It was as if nature had flipped its own version of the off switch, leaving Aksum to fend for itself. And just when you thought it couldn't get worse, the trade winds, both literal and metaphorical, shifted, leaving Aksum high and dry. The rise of Islam in the Arabian Peninsula rerouted key trade routes, pivoting away from Aksumite ports faster than a GPS recalculating a missed turn. The lucrative Red Sea trade network that had once been Aksum's lifeline now bypassed the kingdom, favoring new players on the block like the Islamic caliphates. Aksumite merchants, who once counted gold coins like kids tallying Halloween candy, now found themselves holding empty bags. It was the ancient equivalent of having your favorite app suddenly crash, leaving your digital world in chaos. But wait, there's more. Internal strife and political upheaval were the unwelcome guests at Aksum's already overcrowded downfall party. Regional nobles, perhaps sensing the kingdom's vulnerability, began to flex their muscles, vying for power and disrupting the once stable political landscape. It was a classic Game of Thrones scenario, minus the dragons, but with all the backstabbing intrigue. The centralized power of Aksum's rulers fragmented, like a shattered vase, each piece representing a fledgling faction eager to claim its share of the spoils. The result: Aksum's decline was not the stuff of epic battles or dramatic collapses, but rather a slow, agonizing retreat into obscurity. By the 10th century, the kingdom that had once stood as a beacon of power and prosperity was reduced to little more than a shadow of its former self, its grandeur eroded by forces both external and internal. If history is a stage, Aksum exited not with a bang but a whimper, leaving behind ruins that would puzzle archaeologists and tantalize romantics for centuries to come. Yet, even as Aksum faded from the limelight, its legacy cast a long shadow over the region that would become modern Ethiopia. The social structure forged in Aksum's heyday, an intricate hierarchy of kings, nobles, and traders, continued to influence Ethiopian society, like an ancient blueprint that future generations couldn't resist tinkering with. The echoes of Aksum's past reverberated through the centuries, shaping the political and cultural landscape in ways both subtle and profound. Take the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, for example, a direct descendant of King Ezana's conversion to Christianity. This religious institution became a cornerstone of Ethiopian identity, wielding influence that rivaled even the most powerful of emperors. The Aksumite tradition of intertwining faith and statecraft lived on, like a stubborn vine that refused to be uprooted, threading its way through Ethiopia's tumultuous history. And let's not forget the enduring allure of Aksum's myths and legends, which continue to captivate imaginations as far afield as Hollywood. The tales of the Queen of Sheba and her supposed connections to Aksum have been spun into countless stories, each more fantastical than the last. Perhaps it's the mystery that keeps us coming back, the tantalizing possibility that somewhere beneath the layers of myth lies a kernel of truth waiting to be unearthed. In reflecting on Aksum's legacy, it's hard not to marvel at how history has a way of repeating itself, albeit with a modern twist. Environmental challenges that contributed to Aksum's decline, think climate change and resource scarcity, are still very much alive today, albeit with better technology and worse Wi-Fi. As we navigate our own turbulent times, Aksum's story serves as a poignant reminder of the delicate balance between human ambition and the forces of nature, a balance that, despite our best efforts, remains as precarious as ever. So, as we bid farewell to the kingdom of Aksum, let's carry forward its lessons, both the triumphs and the trials. Let's remember that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a rich tapestry of human experience, woven together by the choices we make and the stories we tell. And who knows, maybe someday, as we grapple with our own set of challenges, we'll reflect on Aksum's saga with newfound appreciation, pondering how a kingdom that once stood at the crossroads of the ancient world still has much to teach us in the here and now. In the end, Aksum's story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of innovation, and the enduring allure of a well-told tale. So here's to Aksum, a kingdom that may have vanished from the map, but remains etched in the annals of history, a reminder that even in decline, there is often a legacy worth celebrating. In the grand tapestry of history, the Byzantine Empire is that eccentric uncle who shows up at family events with wild stories and even wilder outfits. It's the empire that lasted over 1,000 years, from 330 AD to 1453 AD, and managed to make Rome look like a short-lived college fling. Now, the Byzantines weren't just sitting around munching on baklava and gossiping about their neighbors. They were busy crafting art that would leave a mark on the world, quite literally. Enter Byzantine iconography, a swirling mix of faith, politics, and a splash of artistic flair that would make even the most seasoned art critic raise an eyebrow. Icons, you see, were not just pretty pictures to hang in your local basilica. They were the medieval equivalent of a political tweet storm, both revered and controversial. The roots of Byzantine iconography dig deep into the rocky soil of the empire's tumultuous history. It all kicked off in 330 AD when Emperor Constantine decided that Rome was so last season and moved the capital to Byzantium, later known as Constantinople and modern-day Istanbul. With this shift, the empire became a melting pot of cultures, ideas, and, inevitably, religious squabbles. And boy, did the Byzantines love a good theological debate. Picture a medieval Reddit thread, but with more togas and less civility. The birth of Byzantine iconography can be traced back to the early days of the empire, when Christianity was just finding its feet, and saints were being minted faster than cryptocurrency. The church needed a way to connect the divine with the masses, and what better way than through art? After all, not everyone could read, but everyone could gaze at a glorious image of Christ, or the Virgin Mary with awe, or at least with a sense of pious obligation. But don't be fooled by the serene faces and gilded halos. These icons had as much to do with politics as they did with piety. In a time when emperors were as much a part of the church as the priests themselves, icons became tools of statecraft. They were used to enforce orthodoxy, assert imperial authority, and even rally the populace in times of crisis. Think of them as medieval propaganda posters, but with a divine twist. The production of these icons was no small feat. It required skilled artisans, expensive materials like gold leaf and precious pigments, and of course, the blessing of the church. And like any good piece of political art, they had to toe the line between innovation and tradition. Deviate too much from the established norms, and you risked the wrath of both clergy and emperor. Not exactly a career move you'd recommend. Yet, amidst all this, Byzantine icons were genuinely beloved by the people. They were seen as windows to the divine, conduits of miracles, and even protectors in battle. One might say they were the ultimate multi-tool of medieval spirituality. But as much as they were adored, they were also at the center of one of the most heated controversies of the era, the iconoclastic controversy. Imagine a century-long feud where the stakes were eternal salvation and the weapons were frescoes and chisels. But that's a story for another time. So why does any of this matter today? Well, Byzantine iconography was a game-changer. It set the standard for religious art for centuries to come, influencing everything from Russian Orthodox churches to modern-day museum exhibits. It was an art form that transcended its time, leaving behind a legacy that's as politically charged as it is spiritually revered. In essence, Byzantine icons weren't just art. They were a mirror reflecting the complexities of an empire caught between heaven and earth, faith and politics, tradition and change. And in that reflection, we see the timeless dance of power and belief, a dance that, in many ways, continues to this day. So next time you see a Byzantine icon, remember, you're not just looking at a piece of art. You're staring into the heart of an empire with all its glories and contradictions laid bare. And speaking of contradictions, let's dive headfirst into one of the Byzantine Empire's most infamous episodes, the iconoclast controversy. This wasn't just your average art critique session. It was a full-blown cultural smackdown. Imagine if the Met Gala turned into a demolition derby, with icons as the main course. The iconoclast controversy kicked off in the 8th century, when Emperor Leo Roman III decided that enough was enough with all the kissing of icons and veneration of wooden panels. He proclaimed that these icons were idolatrous, effectively launching a campaign to smash them to bits. This was more than just an aesthetic choice. It was a bold political move. Leo Roman III was playing a high-stakes game, not unlike a medieval version of Jenga, where one wrong move could bring the whole empire tumbling down. You see, the empire was under pressure from all sides. The Islamic Caliphate was expanding rapidly, and there were internal issues to boot, like volcanic eruptions and plagues, just your usual imperial headaches. Leo Roman III likely saw the icon smashing as a way to unify the empire under a more austere form of Christianity, and to assert his authority over religious matters. After all, why should the clergy have all the fun? But hold your horses before you start imagining Leo as some medieval art vandal. The guy had a plan. By outlawing icons, he aimed to redirect the church's resources, both spiritual and financial. slipped back into the hands of the state. The empire's economy was strained, and those icons were worth a pretty penny. Crafted with gold leaf and costly pigments, they weren't just religious symbols. They were a significant investment. Destroying them was like burning money, which, in this context, was a way to stop the church from hoarding wealth. The controversy didn't just end with Leo Roman III. His successors, notably Constantine V, took the icon-smashing baton and ran with it. Constantine was a man on a mission, and he was determined to rid the empire of what he saw as the corrupting influence of icons. Under his reign, the iconoclast policies reached a fever pitch, with monasteries being raided and monks being forced to choose between their icons or their lives. Imagine a medieval Marie Kondo, but instead of sparking joy, he was sparking bonfires of religious art. Talk about a power play. This wasn't just a battle over religious imagery. It was about who got to call the shots in the Byzantine Empire. The emperors weren't just concerned with the spiritual implications of icons. They were keenly aware of the political power and economic clout that came with controlling religious imagery. If you control what people worship, you control the people. It's like having the ultimate remote control over society. The economic impact of this controversy was significant. By destroying icons, the empire was effectively melting down the church's assets, literally. Precious metals and pigments that once adorned church walls were repurposed, funneled back into the state's coffers. It was like a medieval recycling program, but instead of saving the planet, they were trying to save an empire on the brink of collapse. In a time when the annual revenue of the empire was around 5 million solidi, that's about 70,000 pounds of gold, every little bit helped. But here's where things get juicy. While the iconoclasts were busy smashing icons, the iconodules, those who supported the veneration of icons, weren't just sitting around twiddling their thumbs. They saw the iconoclastic policies as an affront to their faith and their way of life. Monks became the rock stars of the resistance, smuggling icons out of churches and into the black market of religious art. It was like a Dan Brown novel, but with more robes and less cryptography. As the controversy raged on, the empire found itself divided. This was more than just a theological debate. It was a cultural schism that split families, communities, and even the imperial court. And while the emperors may have thought they were acting with divine mandate, political fallout was anything but heavenly. The controversy weakened the empire's cohesion, leaving it vulnerable to external threats. By the time the Second Council of Nicaea rolled around in 787 AD, the iconodules had had enough. The council marked the official end of the first phase of iconoclasm, declaring that the veneration of icons was not only acceptable, but necessary for the Christian faith. The church and the state were once again at odds, a tension that would simmer for decades until the final resolution in 843 AD, known as the Triumph of Orthodoxy. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This was a messier affair than a Byzantine dinner party. While the council's decision was a victory for the iconodules, the empire was still grappling with the economic and social fallout of the controversy. The destruction of icons had left a gaping hole in the church's wealth. The empire's coffers weren't exactly overflowing with gold. The economic impact was felt for generations as the empire struggled to rebuild its artistic heritage and re-establish its religious identity. In a way, the iconoclast controversy was a microcosm of the Byzantine Empire itself, a complex dance of power, politics, and piety, with the stakes as high as they come. It was a time when the lines between church and state were as blurred as a Byzantine mosaic, and as the dust settled, it became clear that the controversy had left an indelible mark, not just on the empire's art, but on its very soul. So, the next time you find yourself gazing at a Byzantine icon, spare a thought for the tumultuous history that brought it into being. Behind every serene face and gilded halo lies a story of struggle, sacrifice, and the eternal clash between faith and power. And remember, in the Byzantine Empire, nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. The iconoclast controversy was a testament to that, a time when smashing art was a political statement, and the echoes of those shattered icons still resonate today. And just like that, the Byzantine Empire found itself on the brink of an artistic renaissance, ready to embrace its icons again with the enthusiasm of a kid in a candy store. The iconoclast controversy might have left the empire in a bit of a spiritual hangover, but the stage was set for what could only be described as the Icon comeback tour of the millennium. This wasn't just a return to the status quo. It was a full-blown revival that would see icons become even more central to Byzantine spirituality and identity. The year was 843 AD, and the triumph of orthodoxy marked more than just the end of iconoclasm. It was the dawn of a new era. The Byzantine Empire was ready to make icons not just a part of religious life, but the very heartbeat of its culture. Think of it as the empire doubling down on its spiritual stock portfolio. And yes, icons were the blue-chip assets. This wasn't just about slapping a few frescoes back on church walls. It was about reaffirming the empire's identity and resilience through art. First, let's talk about monasteries. These were the spiritual powerhouses of the Byzantine world, like medieval Silicon Valleys for theological thought and artistic production. Monks, who had once risked life and limb to protect their beloved icons, were now back in business, crafting and venerating icons with the zeal of a startup founder after a successful IPO. The monasteries became safe havens for artists and craftsmen, who were once again free to dip their brushes into the finest pigments without fear of imperial retribution. Economically, this resurgence of iconography was a godsend, pun intended. Monasteries started to thrive once more, and with them, the local economies that depended on their prosperity. Artisans found steady work in creating icons, frescoes, and mosaics, fueling a demand for materials like gold leaf and lapis lazuli. The Byzantine economy, ever the opportunist, seized this chance to turn religious devotion into a profitable venture. This was an era where piety met prosperity, and icons were the currency of both realms. Churches, too, became lively galleries of faith, with icons playing the starring role. They weren't just decorative pieces. They were integral to liturgical practices and the spiritual life of the community. Icons were believed to be conduits of divine power, capable of performing miracles and offering protection. Imagine a world where every church visit was like an episode of Touched by an Angel, with icons providing the celestial guest appearances. In the daily lives of ordinary Byzantines, icons were ever present, offering comfort and guidance. From the grandest cathedral to the humblest home, these sacred images adorned walls, altars, and even personal belongings, were as much a part of Byzantine life as olive oil and baklava. For the average Byzantine, icons were more than art. They were companions in faith, silent witnesses to both the mundane and the miraculous. Yet let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. The return of icons also brought its fair share of challenges. For one, the empire had to contend with the economic aftershocks of decades of iconoclasm. Restoring iconographic art was costly, and the Byzantine treasury wasn't exactly overflowing with cash. The empire had to balance its religious devotion with fiscal responsibility, a tightrope walk that would make even the most seasoned accountant break a sweat. Politically, the reemergence of icons was a double-edged sword. While it helped unify the empire under a shared religious identity, it also reignited tensions between the church and the state. The question of who truly held spiritual authority, the emperor or the patriarch, was a debate that simmered beneath the surface, ready to boil over at any moment. Icons, once the battleground of controversy, were now symbols of both unity and division. But beyond the politics and economics, the revival of iconography signified something deeper for the Byzantine people. It was a testament to their resilience and an affirmation of their faith. A world fraught with uncertainties, where empires rose and fell with alarming regularity, the Byzantines clung to their icons as anchors in a turbulent sea. These sacred images, with their serene faces and gilded halos, offered a glimpse of the divine in the midst of earthly struggles. And so, the Byzantine Empire continued its dance between heaven and earth, a dance choreographed by faith, politics, and the ever-present allure of art. Icons, once the objects of controversy, had become the cherished heart of Byzantine spirituality, their influence extending far beyond the borders of the empire. They were the cultural ambassadors of Byzantium, carrying the empire's legacy to the farthest corners of the Christian world. As we leave this chapter of Byzantine history, it's clear that the story of icons is far from over. They would continue to evolve and adapt, reflecting the changing tides of an empire that was always in motion. So, as we prepare to delve deeper into the Byzantine saga, remember that behind every icon lies a story of struggle, triumph, and the timeless interplay of faith and power. And with that, we turn the page to see what the next chapter holds for this ever-fascinating empire. As the Byzantine Empire waltzed into its next artistic act, let's pause and peek behind the gilded curtain of Byzantine iconography to uncover what made these masterpieces tick. Spoiler alert, it wasn't divine intervention, it was good old-fashioned craftsmanship, with a sprinkle of economic savvy and a dash of political maneuvering. First up, let's talk raw materials. The Byzantines didn't just slap some paint on wood and call it a day. No, they went all out, using gold leaf like it was going out of style. And why gold? Well, besides its obvious bling factor, gold was thought to reflect divine light, a celestial Instagram filter for saints. But acquiring this luminous metal wasn't as easy as digging in your backyard. Gold had to be imported via complex trade routes stretching from the gold mines of Nubia to the bustling marketplaces of Constantinople. Talk about a supply chain that would make Amazon blush. Speaking of gold, let's not forget about those vibrant pigments that made Byzantine icons harp more than a peacock at a pigeon party. Artists used pigments derived from exotic minerals and plants. Lapis lazuli, that deep blue hue worthy of a royal robe, was sourced all the way from Afghanistan. Transporting this precious stone across treacherous terrains was the ancient equivalent of a high-stakes road trip, complete with bandits and bad weather. But the payoff, a color so rich it practically hummed with the divine. And then there was the not-so-humble egg tempera. Forget your fancy oils. The Byzantines were all about the eggs. By mixing pigments with egg yolk, artists created a paint that dried quickly and lasted longer than a Byzantine emperor's reign. No small feat, given the empire's penchant for political musical chairs. Tempera was the secret sauce that held the vibrant colors in place, ensuring these icons could withstand the test of time and the occasional overzealous veneration. But these materials didn't just appear out of thin air. The Byzantine economy, always the opportunist, capitalized on this demand for luxury art supplies. Markets thrived on the trade of pigments, metals, and other artisanal necessities, creating a bustling ecosystem of merchants, traders, and artisans. This wasn't just about artistic expression. It was a full-blown industry, with Byzantine icons serving as both spiritual beacons and economic stimuli. Now, let's delve into the artistry itself. The creation of an icon was more than just a paint-by-numbers affair. Artists followed a strict hierarchical process, akin to a medieval assembly line. First, the wood panel was meticulously prepared, often coated with gesso, a blend of chalk and glue, to create a smooth surface. Next, the image was sketched, following precise theological guidelines. This was no time for creative liberties. Deviating from the script could land an artist in heart-holy water. Once the sketch was approved, it was time to lay down the gold leaf. Imagine the precision of a brain surgeon mixed with the finesse of a pastry chef, and you've got the idea. Gold leaf was applied using a technique called gilding, where ultra-thin sheets of gold were adhered to the surface, creating that iconic halo effect. This wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a visual sermon, proclaiming the heavenly nature of its subject. The final step involved bringing the icon to life with color, layer by painstaking layer. Artists painted with the same reverence they would afford a sacred rite, often fasting and praying before beginning their work. And while we're at it, let's dispel the myth of the solitary genius toiling away in a candlelit studio. Creating an icon was a team effort, involving a whole workshop of skilled artisans, each contributing their expertise to the final masterpiece. Now, let's talk money. Producing these icons wasn't cheap. A single icon could cost anywhere from a few solidi to the equivalent of a small fortune, depending on its size and complexity. For context, a solidus was a gold coin weighing about 5 grams. With the empire's annual income hovering around 5 million solidi, commissioning an icon was no impulse buy. It was a calculated investment in both spiritual capital and social status. And where did all this wealth go? Into the pockets of the Byzantine elite, of course. The emperors and church leaders who commissioned these icons knew their symbolic power and weren't shy about flaunting them. Icons adorned palaces and churches, serving as both spiritual symbols and status symbols. They were the Byzantine equivalent of a luxury car, eye-catching, extravagant, and guaranteed to turn heads. But beyond the glitz and glamour, there was a deeper economic narrative at play. The production of icons supported a vast network of craftsmen, traders, and merchants, creating jobs and stimulating local economies. The demand for raw materials spurred trade, while the need for skilled artisans fostered the development of workshops and guilds. This was an era where art and commerce intertwined, each driving the other forward in a symbiotic dance. Yet, amidst all this material splendor, let's not lose sight of the spiritual significance of these icons. For the Byzantines, these were not mere decorations, but sacred objects, believed to bridge the gap between the earthly and the divine. Icons were thought to possess miraculous powers, capable of healing the sick, protecting cities, and even influencing the outcome of battles. In a world where life was unpredictable and often perilous, these sacred images offered solace and hope. And there you have it, a glimpse into the intricate world of Byzantine iconography, where art met economy and faith intersected with politics. Behind every icon lay a story of craftsmanship, commerce, and devotion, a testament to the empire's enduring legacy. As we prepare to dive even deeper into the Byzantine saga, keep in mind that these icons were more than just art. They were the heartbeat of an empire, pulsing with the complexities of a civilization caught between heaven and earth. Stay tuned, because the Byzantine Empire's story is far from over. We've seen their icons come to life, but what happens when the empire itself becomes a canvas for the world's ambitions? There's a new chapter on the horizon, one that will see the Byzantines navigate the treacherous waters of diplomacy and warfare. But for now, let's savor the art and the artisans who brought the Byzantine vision to life, one brushstroke at a time. And so, as the Byzantine Empire prepared to paint its next grand narrative on the canvas of history, let's pause and consider the lasting legacy of its iconic art. These shimmering icons, once embroiled in fierce debates and political machinations, have transcended their tumultuous origins to become timeless symbols of faith and identity. It's a testament to the artistry and resilience of the Byzantines that their icons continue to captivate imaginations, long after the empire itself has crumbled into the annals of history. Fast forward to today, and Byzantine iconography is still very much alive and kicking in the world of art and religion. Walk into an Orthodox church, from Greece to Russia, and you'll find icons that feel like déjà vu, an echo of the Byzantine originals. In fact, the Russian Orthodox Church adopted Byzantine iconography with the enthusiasm of a fan who just discovered their favorite band. They took the Byzantine style and ran with it, creating a rich tradition that continues to influence religious art across Eastern Europe. And let's not forget the modern art scene, where Byzantine influences pop up like Easter eggs in a Marvel movie. Artists like Wassily Kandinsky and Kazimir Malevich drew inspiration from the bold lines and vibrant colors of Byzantine icons, weaving them into their own avant-garde works. It's as if the ghosts of Byzantine artists are whispering through the brushstrokes of contemporary canvases, reminding us that their legacy is far from dead. Even Andy Warhol, the king of pop art, paid homage to Byzantine iconography in his series of religious-inspired works, proving that sacred art can hang out with the cool kids at the art party. Now, let's talk about those mystical powers legends have attributed to Byzantine icons, because who doesn't love a good myth-busting session? Sure, tales of icons, shedding tears, or healing the sick make for great storytelling, but let's keep our feet on the ground. While these stories captured the imaginations of medieval believers, the reality is that any supernatural claims likely had more to do with human psychology than divine intervention. People saw what they wanted, or needed, to see, especially in times of crisis. It's like how your phone suddenly becomes the most interesting thing in the world when you're trying to avoid eye contact at a party. But let's not throw the baby out with the holy water. Just because we debunk the miracles doesn't mean we dismiss the icon's cultural significance. These images were powerful symbols in a world where literacy was a privilege, not a right. They communicated complex theological ideas through visual storytelling, bridging the gap between the divine and the everyday. And in doing so, they became indispensable tools for spiritual connection and community cohesion. Economically speaking, the legacy of Byzantine icons is also rather fascinating. The art market, both ancient and modern, has always been a bit like the Wild West, a place where value is as much about perception as it is about material worth. Byzantine icons are now prized collectibles, fetching hefty sums at auctions. In 2008, a 14th century Byzantine icon sold for a cool $2 million at Sotheby's in London. It's the kind of price tag that would make even the most pious monk raise an eyebrow. The enduring appeal of Byzantine iconography is also a testament to the empire's cultural diplomacy. By exporting their art and architecture, the Byzantines didn't just spread their religious practices, they spread their influence. The Hagia Sophia, with its iconic domes and intricate mosaics, became a blueprint for religious architecture from Italy to Persia. It was like the Byzantine Empire's greatest hits album, spinning on repeat across the medieval world. But let's not romanticize this cultural exchange as a purely altruistic venture. Spreading art and architecture was as much about asserting power and influence as it was about sharing beauty. The Byzantines understood that controlling the narrative meant controlling the perception. It's a strategy as old as time. After all, he who tells the story holds the power. And by embedding their icons in the spiritual fabric of other cultures, the Byzantines ensured their legacy would outlast the empire itself. As we wrap up this journey through Byzantine iconography, it's clear these images are far more than historical artifacts. They're living testaments to the Byzantine Empire's complex dance with faith, politics, and art, a dance that still waltzes its way through the present. Whether hanging in museums or tucked in the nooks of ancient chapels, these icons remind us of a time when art was both a personal devotion and a public declaration. So, as you mull over the glittering mosaics and gilded halos, remember that Byzantine iconography is not just a relic of the past. It's a legacy that continues to shape our understanding of art and spirituality. These sacred images are a bridge between the earthly and the divine, a reminder that even in a world as chaotic as ours, there is beauty to be found in the interplay of light, color, and meaning. And with that, we close this chapter on Byzantine iconography, leaving you with a final thought. In the grand tapestry of history, the Byzantines painted with a brush dipped in both ambition and faith, creating a legacy that defies time itself. As the first rays of sunlight spill across the vast Eurasian steppe, you wake up snug inside your yurt, a marvel of nomadic engineering that could give modern pop-up tents a serious run for their money. Now, I know what you're thinking. A yurt? Really? But before you dismiss it as just a fancy tent, let's get into the nitty-gritty. The yurt is your portable fortress, designed with the precision of a Swiss watch. It's circular because back in the day, Mongols knew that a round shape offered strength against the relentless steppe winds. Plus, the circular design symbolizes eternity, an apt metaphor, considering the Mongol Empire seemed to be aiming for eternal conquest. Your yurt is made of felt, layered over a wooden frame, and it's both spacious and surprisingly cozy. And let's not forget the door always faces south, a strategic move that keeps the northern chill at bay while inviting in the warmth of the sun. Inside, the space is divided with military precision. On one side you have your bedrolls, on the other, a place for cooking, and right in the center, the hearth. Fire is the heart of your home, a place to cook, warm up, and gather around for stories of conquest and glory. Now, let's talk about starting your day Mongol style. You roll out of bed, and the first order of business is kumis, the breakfast of champions, or at least of horse archers. Kumis, fermented mare's milk, is the ultimate wake-up call. Think of it as the original energy drink, with just a hint of a kick to it. It's packed with nutrients and a touch of alcohol, making it the perfect combo to jumpstart your day. And let's be honest, a little buzz never hurt anyone when you're about to ride into a day of archery and empire building. As you sip your kumis, you glance around your yurt, which is more than just a home. It's a symbol of your entire lifestyle. Everything is designed for mobility, because unlike those sedentary types who build cities and walls, you're all about freedom and movement. Need to pack up and move to greener pastures? No problem. You can dismantle and reassemble the yurt in under an hour. It's like living in a Lego set, but way more functional. Outside, your trusty horse is waiting. Mongol horses, by the way, are nothing like the high-maintenance thoroughbreds you might see today. They're compact, sturdy, and about as tough as a creature can get. They can survive on minimal water and food, and they're practically born knowing how to find their way home. The bond between you and your horse is crucial. In fact, it's said that a Mongol warrior could ride over 100 miles in a day. Now that's a commute that puts your average car ride to shame. Your horse isn't just a mode of transport. It's your partner in warfare, your lifeline on the steppe, and a crucial element of the Mongol economy. Speaking of which, let's address the elephant, or rather the whole empire, in the room. Mongol economics were as innovative as their military tactics. Forget gold coins and paper money. Livestock is the currency here. A man's wealth is measured in horses, sheep, and goats, not in some shiny metal. It's a brilliant system, really, nothing like a living, breathing bank account that can gallop away. Before you saddle up, perform a few morning rituals. First, you inspect your bow, your trusty composite bow made from wood, horn, and sinew. It's a masterpiece of craftsmanship, capable of launching arrows with lethal precision at distances up to 500 meters. Imagine that, an arrow traveling 5 football fields, and with a firing rate of up to 12 shots per minute, you're basically a medieval machine gun. Your day as a Mongol horse archer is about more than just survival. It's about thriving in one of the harshest environments on Earth. The Mongol Empire didn't just happen by chance. It was built on the backs of warriors like you, who could adapt, innovate, and conquer. Your morning routine sets the stage for this, blending practicality with strategic foresight. From the design of your home to the first sip of kumis, every element is a piece of the larger puzzle that is the Mongol way of life. As you finish your kumis and prepare to mount your horse, take a moment to reflect on the sheer audacity of your empire. Under Genghis Khan, the Mongols would go on to control roughly 9 million square miles of territory. That's more land than the Roman Empire at its peak. The Mongols weren't just warriors. They were innovators, diplomats, and economic strategists. The morning routine you're engaged in is a microcosm of the larger Mongol strategy. Simplicity, efficiency, and a relentless drive to conquer and connect the world. So there you are, ready to ride into the day. With your bow in hand, horse beneath you, and the endless steppe stretching out to the horizon, you're not just a part of history, you're riding it, one arrow at a time. And just like that, you're off, riding into the expanse of the steppe with the wind in your hair and a quiver full of possibilities. The Mongol lifestyle is practically a boot camp for the ultimate warrior, and it all starts from the moment you're old enough to toddle around on those tiny legs. Picture this. A Mongol child barely out of diapers is already learning the ropes, literally. By the age of 3, you're riding ponies, and by the time you're 5, you're wielding a bow that would put Robin Hood to shame. Speaking of bows, let's dish out some praise for the Mongol composite bow, a technological marvel that would make an Apple engineer weep with envy. Unlike those cumbersome English longbows, the Mongol bow is compact, curved, and packed with enough power to punch through armor like it's papier-mâché. It's made from a cocktail of wood, animal horn, and sinew, glued together with fish bladder adhesive, because who doesn't love a bit of DIY with fish guts? This bow is a product of painstaking craftsmanship, with each one taking up to a year to make. But the payoff? A bow that could send arrows up to 500 meters. That's about 5 football fields, for those keeping score at home. Now, let's talk tactics. The Mongols didn't just ride into battle with a see-what-sticks mentality. They were the grandmasters of strategic warfare, and it began with relentless training. Archery wasn't just a skill, it was an art form. You practiced shooting from a galloping horse, a feat akin to pitching a perfect game while riding a roller coaster. This wasn't just for show. The ability to shoot with deadly accuracy while moving made you a nightmare on the battlefield. You could rain arrows on your enemies and be gone before they even knew what hit them. But here's where we debunk the myth of Mongol invincibility. Sure, the Mongols were terrifyingly effective, but they weren't some mythical army of invulnerable warriors. No, their real secret weapon was logistics. Under Genghis Khan, the Mongols developed a supply chain so efficient it could make Amazon Prime look like snail mail. They utilized a network of supply depots and communication lines that crisscrossed their vast empire, ensuring that troops never ran out of arrows, food, or, heaven forbid, kumis. Communication was another ace up their sleeve. Enter the YAM system, a sort of medieval FedEx. This relay network of horse stations, allowed messages to travel at lightning speed across the empire. Picture this. A rider could cover up to 200 miles a day by switching horses at each yam post. It was the internet of the 13th century, keeping the empire connected and commanders informed. But all this genius wasn't just the work of Genghis Khan alone. No, he was smart enough to surround himself with brilliant minds from all corners of his empire. He was like a talent scout for the ages, recruiting Persian engineers, Chinese strategists, and anyone who could bring something new to the table. It was this melting pot of ideas and innovations that gave the Mongols their edge, not just brute strength or sheer numbers. Now, let's not ignore the economic engine driving this war machine. The Mongol economy wasn't just about plundering and looting, though they were pretty good at that too. It was about creating a trade network that spanned continents. With the Silk Road under their control, they turned the Eurasian steppe into the world's largest marketplace. Goods, ideas, and yes, even diseases traveled along these routes, transforming the Mongol Empire into a global power long before the term was coined. But let's not sugarcoat it. Life as a Mongol warrior was tough. You were constantly on the move, living off the land and whatever you could carry. Your diet was as rugged as your lifestyle. Dried meat, hard cheese, and curdled milk were staples. And when supplies ran low, you might even bleed your horse for a quick protein fix. Not exactly the menu at a five-star restaurant, but it kept you going. So, as you gallop across the steppe, bow in hand and destiny in your sights, remember that you are part of a tapestry woven with innovation, strategy, and a fair bit of audacious ambition. You're not just a cog in the Mongol war machine. You're the engine. Your arrows are not just weapons but messages, signaling the unstoppable force of an empire that dared to dream big and ride hard. The day is young, and the world is yours for the taking. And so the open steppe is your canvas, your horse the brush, painting the fierce strokes of conquest across the vastness of Eurasia. But today, the winds of war carry more than just dust. They bring the anticipation of battle. You, a Mongol horse archer, are not merely a soldier, but the embodiment of a military doctrine that rewrote the rules of warfare. Let's talk about what really goes down on a typical day during a Mongol campaign. First off, forget the Hollywood fantasy of chaotic charges and reckless heroics. The Mongol approach to warfare was more like a chess match than a bar brawl. Everything was meticulously planned, from the timing of attacks to the strategic retreats, a tactic that's as much about mind games as it is about survival. You see, the Mongols were masters of psychological warfare, and today you're about to witness this in action. The day begins with reconnaissance. Mongol scouts, the eyes and ears of the army, ride ahead to gather intel. Their reports are crucial. They map out enemy positions, estimate troop numbers, and identify weak points. This intelligence is fed back to the commanders who, like grandmasters, plan their moves several steps ahead. It's not just about outgunning the enemy, it's about outthinking them. As you ride out, you're part of a highly disciplined unit. Forget the idea of a disorganized horde. Mongol units were divided into groups called Arban, tens, which scaled up to hundreds, thousands, and even tens of thousands. This structure allowed for incredible flexibility and coordination. Your commander could maneuver entire divisions at the drop of a hat, responding to the ebb and flow of battle with precision. It's like having a military-grade GPS, centuries before satellites were a thing. And when it comes to actual combat, the Mongols had a playbook that would make any modern general envious. Take the feigned retreat, for example. It's a classic move. Your unit pretends to flee in panic, luring the enemy into a false sense of victory. As they break formation to pursue, you turn on them with the speed and ferocity of a thunderstorm, catching them off guard and exposing their vulnerable flanks. The effectiveness of this tactic wasn't just in the execution, but in the reputation that preceded it. The Mongols were known for this maneuver, yet time and again, adversaries fell for it. Why? Because psychological warfare is all about creating fear and uncertainty. The Mongol army had a reputation for invincibility, and that alone could break an enemy's spirit before a single arrow was loosed. It's not just about fighting battles, it's about winning them before they even begin. And let's not forget the chilling efficiency of the Mongol bow, the weapon that made you a force to be reckoned with. The composite bow wasn't just for show, it was your ticket to tactical superiority. With a draw weight of up to 160 pounds, and a range that could outshoot most contemporary weapons. You could engage enemies from a distance, picking them off before they could even get close. You were like the original sniper, but on horseback and with a much cooler uniform. Speaking of uniforms, let's debunk another myth. Mongol warriors weren't clad in rags or piecemeal armor. Your typical gear was a mix of practicality and protection. Quilted silk shirts offered a surprising degree of defense. Arrows could pierce, but often got tangled in the fabric, reducing penetration. Over this, you'd have leather or lamellar armor, both lightweight and flexible, perfect for the high mobility strategies that were your bread and butter. Now, let's address the elephant in the steppe, the sheer brutality of Mongol conquests. Yes, the Mongols were fearsome, and their campaigns often left a trail of devastation. Cities that resisted faced harsh fates, massacres, destruction, and the infamous pyramids of skulls that served as a grim warning to others. But these weren't acts of wanton cruelty. They were calculated moves, designed to break resistance and ensure swift submission. Harsh, yes. Effective, absolutely. It's a dark reminder that in the world of power, fear is a currency as valuable as gold. But the Mongols weren't just about conquering, they were about integrating. Once a region was subdued, the Mongols often incorporated local leaders into their administration, respecting customs and religions. It was a pragmatic approach, one that ensured stability and loyalty. After all, what's the point of conquering the world if it's constantly rebelling? The Mongols understood the importance of governance, and their empire wasn't just a patchwork of territories, but a sprawling network connected by trade, communication, and an exchange of ideas. On the economic front, the Mongol Empire was a behemoth. When you control the Silk Road, you control the flow of goods, wealth, and innovation. The Mongols facilitated trade like never before, offering protection to merchants and ensuring safe passage across their lands. It was an economic boom that turned the steppe into a bustling artery of commerce. And while the plunder from conquests filled your coffers, it was this trade that sustained the empire in the long run. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows over the battlefield, you and your fellow warriors prepare to make camp. It's been a day of precision and power, a demonstration of the Mongol war machine's might. As you gather around the fire, tales of the day's exploits are shared, each story a thread in the rich tapestry of Mongol history. But remember, tomorrow is another day, another opportunity to reshape the world in the Mongol image. The campaign continues, and with it, the relentless drive of an empire that dared to dream as big as the sky. You, a Mongol horse archer, are at the heart of this unstoppable force, ready to ride into the future with the same audacity that has brought you this far. The steppe is vast, the world even more so, and the Mongol Empire is far from finished. As the last embers of daylight flicker out, casting an amber glow over the horizon, you and your fellow Mongol warriors turn toward the warmth of the campfire. It's time to shift gears from the day's conquests to the quieter, subtler art of unwinding. You might think these fearsome warriors would spend their evenings sharpening swords or plotting their next move, but here's the twist. When the sun sets on the steppe, the Mongols reveal a surprisingly rich tapestry of culture and family life. Yes, under those fearsome helmets beat the hearts of poets, musicians, and diplomats. First up, let's talk family. Forget the notion of the Mongol warrior as a solitary figure, forever alone on the steppe. The Mongols were all about family ties and social structure. The clan system was the backbone of their society. Your loyalty wasn't just to your immediate family, but extended to your entire ulus, a term that could refer to everything from a family unit to the entire Mongol nation, depending on context. It's like having a family WhatsApp group chat with 1,000 members. Everyone's involved, and you better pay attention. Mongol women, in particular, played a pivotal role in family and community life. While the men were off crafting the next chapter of their imperial saga, the women managed the homestead, handled trade and diplomacy, and sometimes even commanded troops. Take Bert, Genghis Khan's wife, for instance. She was no mere footnote in history, but a formidable leader who held her family, and often the entire Mongol court, together. In a society where survival depended on every pair of hands, gender roles were more flexible than you might think. Speaking of survival, let's delve into the economics of the nomadic lifestyle. When your home is a yurt, and your wealth moves on 4 legs, your idea of prosperity is a bit different. Livestock was more than just a food source. It was your bank account, transportation, and status symbol rolled into one. Horses were the blue-chip stocks of the Mongol economy, but sheep and goats were the small-cap investments that kept daily life ticking over. A good shepherd was like a savvy stockbroker, managing resources to ensure the clan's prosperity. And when the herds grew too large, it was time to pack up the yurt and hit the road, chasing the promise of greener pastures. Now, let's not forget the arts. Yes, you heard that right, arts. The Mongols had a rich oral tradition, with epic tales and songs passed down through generations. These weren't just bedtime stories. They were the cultural glue that held the Mongol identity together. The most famous of these is The Secret History of the Mongols, a mix of biography, epic poetry, and historical account. Think of it as the original multi-genre bestseller, chronicling the rise of Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire with a flair that would make even a modern novelist blush. And what about leisure? The Mongols knew how to enjoy themselves when the day's work was done. Wrestling, archery, and horse racing were the big three when it came to sports. Forget the Olympics. The Mongol Naadam festival was a showcase of athletic prowess, a time when warriors put down their weapons and picked up a bow or grappled in a friendly bout. It was more than just entertainment. It was a celebration of the skills that had propelled the Mongol Empire to greatness. But let's pivot to a less physical, yet equally vital aspect of Mongol life, diplomacy. You might not picture a Mongol warrior as a diplomat, but they were masters of negotiation. The Mongol Empire was a vast, culturally diverse patchwork, and maintaining control required more than brute force. Diplomacy was crucial, and the Mongols knew how to play that game. They offered religious freedom and incorporated local leaders into their administration, turning potential foes into allies. Trade, too, was a form of diplomacy. The Mongols didn't just conquer, they connected. By controlling the Silk Road, they facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and culture across continents. It was a veritable highway of commerce that brought everything from Chinese silk to Persian carpets to the markets of Europe. And let's not forget the more infamous travelers, like the Black Death, which hitched a ride along these trade routes, reshaping the demographic landscape of medieval Europe. As the evening deepens, the air fills with the sound of the morinkhua, or horsehead fiddle, an instrument as uniquely Mongol as their composite bow. The haunting melodies evoke the vastness of the steppe, the rhythm of hooves, and the whispers of the wind. It's a moment of reflection, a reminder that beneath the armor and the strategy, there's a soul that finds solace in music and storytelling. Now, let's bust another myth, the idea that the Mongols were cultural barbarians. On the contrary, they were cultural magpies, picking up and incorporating the best of what they encountered. From Chinese paper money to Persian architecture, the Mongols had an eye for innovation and a knack for adaptation. It wasn't just about conquest. It was about synthesis and transformation, creating an empire that was as much about ideas as it was about territory. And as the fire crackles and the stories weave their magic, you realize that this is how the Mongols balanced their fearsome reputation with a deeply rooted cultural identity. The empire wasn't just a collection of conquered lands. It was a complex social fabric held together by family, tradition, and the arts. It's a testament to the Mongol genius for adaptation and integration, a reminder that even the mightiest warriors need time to laugh, to sing, and to dream. So, as you prepare to rest under the vast, starlit sky, remember that the Mongol Empire was more than just a military powerhouse. It was a vibrant, dynamic society where the clash of swords was tempered by the strum of a fiddle, where the bonds of family and tradition were as strong as the sinew in a composite bow. And tomorrow, as the sun rises once more over the endless steppe, you'll be ready to ride into another day, carrying with you the indomitable spirit of the Mongol people. As you drift off beneath the blanket of stars, let's take a moment to ponder the legacy of the Mongol Empire. Because let's face it, these folks weren't just about horseback heroics and Genghis Khan's greatest hits. The Mongols left footprints that have echoed through centuries, shaping trade, culture, and geopolitics in ways that still resonate today. First, let's talk trade. The Mongols turned the Silk Road into a medieval superhighway, connecting Europe, Asia, and the Middle East like a sprawling ancient Amazon prime. Under Mongol rule, a merchant could travel from Venice to Beijing without needing a passport or worrying about bandits. They even had a passport system of sorts, called Pesa, which was basically a VIP badge that granted safe passage and access to resources. Remember, this was in the 13th century, when most people thought crossing a continent was about as likely as finding a unicorn in your backyard. The Mongol Empire wasn't just about flow of goods, it was about the flow of ideas. Philosophies, technologies, and even culinary innovations made their way across continents at an unprecedented rate. Imagine Marco Polo bringing back tales of pasta to Italy, setting the stage for spaghetti to become a cultural icon. Or think about how gunpowder, originally a Chinese invention, found its way into European arsenals, forever changing the face of warfare. The Mongols didn't just conquer, they curated a global exchange that was as much about curiosity as commerce. But here's the kicker. Trade under Mongol rule was also a double-edged sword. Along with silks and spices, the Mongols helped spread the Black Death, a pandemic that wiped out an estimated 25 million people in Europe alone. It's a grim reminder that globalization, even in its earliest forms, came with both dazzling opportunities and devastating risks, like ordering something off the internet and finding out it comes with a hidden subscription fee you didn't sign up for. Now, let's pivot to culture. You might think of the Mongols as destroyers rather than creators, but they were surprisingly adept at cultural synthesis. They borrowed freely from the societies they conquered, creating a vibrant tapestry of cultural exchange. Case in point, the capital at Karakoram, where you could find a mosque, a Buddhist temple, and a Christian church all within walking distance. It was like a medieval version of Times Square, minus the billboards and the guy dressed as Elmo. Politically, the Mongol Empire was a game-changer. They introduced systems of governance that were ahead of their time, such as meritocracy over aristocracy. If you had the skills, you could rise through the ranks, regardless of your background. This wasn't just about fairness, it was practical. Why entrust your army to a noble with no talent when a commoner could do the job better? It's a lesson some modern organizations could still learn from, where talent sometimes plays second fiddle to nepotism. But let's not get too starry-eyed. The Mongol conquests were often brutal, with tactics that left entire cities in ruins and populations decimated. Their military campaigns were marked by a level of devastation that makes even the toughest video game boss battles look like a walk in the park. Yet, these harsh realities were part of their strategy, shock and awe before the term was coined. It's a sobering reminder that great empires often have dark underbellies, built on the suffering of those caught in their path. And what about the Mongol legacy today? Well, you can see it in the rise of the modern state system. Mongols laid the groundwork for the concept of centralized power and the idea of a nation-state. Their influence extended far beyond their time, shaping the development of countries like Russia and China. Even the Great Wall of China, often seen as a symbol of Chinese strength, was fortified in response to Mongol invasions, a testament to the enduring influence of their threat. The Mongol Empire also taught the world a thing or two about adaptability. They were chameleons, blending into the cultures they conquered while maintaining their own identity. It's a lesson in resilience and flexibility, one that modern societies continue to grapple with in a world that's more interconnected than ever. As you lay there, enveloped by the vastness of the steppe, consider the paradox of the Mongols, a people who could be both destroyers and builders, who thrived on both chaos and order. They were a force of nature that reshaped the medieval world, leaving behind a legacy as complex and multifaceted as the empire they built. So, as you close your eyes and let the stories of the Mongol Empire dance in your mind, remember that history is never just a tale of black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of colors, each shade a reflection of the human experience in all its glory and its horror. The Mongols were not just a footnote in history. They were a chapter that redefined what it meant to rule, to trade, and to dream on a scale as vast as the horizon. And with that, you drift into sleep, cradled by the echoes of a past that continues to shape our present, and perhaps might even guide our future. Because in the end, the story of the Mongols is more than just a saga of conquest. It's a reminder of the boundless possibilities and the inevitable complexities of human ambition.